Good afternoon and welcome to the New York City Planning Commission review session for Monday, November 1st, 2021. Before we begin our regular agenda, we will have a presentation by Annie White on the 145 Museum of Civil Rights proposal. This will serve as the presentation for future certification, as this is targeting a November 15th certification. Annie?
Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, commissioners. I will be here to present the project known as 145 Lennox. Next slide. So this is a private application by 145 Lennox LLC for a zoning map amendment, a zoning text amendment, 3 special permits, and 3 City Planning Commission certifications to facilitate the development of 2 connected mixed-use buildings in Community District 10, Manhattan. The proposed development would include over 860 housing units, including permanently affordable units through mandatory inclusionary housing, commercial office and retail space, including a new headquarters for the National Action Network Civil Rights Organization, below grade parking, and a new museum dedicated to civil rights. Next slide. So this is an area map showing the site and some surrounding land uses. The project area, which is coterminous with the development site, you can see here in the red dashed line. It's located at the intersection of West 145th Street and Lenox Avenue in the northern portion of Central Harlem. The site is immediately adjacent to the 3 train stop at 145th and across Lenox Avenue from the Colonel Young Playground. And as you can see, it's just west of the 145th Street bridge that connects to the Bronx. The surrounding neighborhood is predominantly residential with R8 and R72 zoning districts, with many 5 to 10 story multiple dwelling buildings. However, there are several high-rise residential tower complexes in the immediate surrounding, including the 27-story Esplanade Gardens that is a catty corner to the development site. Next slide. Here is a zoom in on the site with the current zoning. So you can see the majority of the site and the blocks to the north are in a C83 zoning district, which is a light industrial commercial district with a 2 FAR commercial that typically results in automotive, self-storage, and other heavy commercial uses. A small portion of the site along the 144th Street frontage and Lenox is within the R72 with a C14 overlay. This district allows residential development up to 3.44 FAR or 4 with quality housing, and community facilities up to 6.5 FAR and commercial uses up to 2. Next slide. So here are some images showing the site and its surroundings. So the commercial overlays are mapped along the major corridors, including the avenues of 145th Street, where you can see some of those ground floor retail uses on the site. The project area includes some vacant lots and some low density commercial buildings, including approximately 20,000 square feet of retail and restaurant uses, 2 vacant storefronts, and approximately 8,000 square feet of community facility use. This includes the current home of the National Action Network. 2 lots are occupied by gas stations, one of which is vacant. Next slide. And here are just some additional photos taking a kind of further step back from the site. You can see at the top right its relation to the Esplanade Garden towers I previously mentioned. And on the bottom right, the site's kind of prominent location as you come over the 145th Street bridge. Next slide. The applicant is proposing to develop a mixed-use complex with 2 buildings. Building 1, located at the corner of Lenox Avenue and West 45th, that's the one that's more in the foreground in the rendering, and Building 2, located mid-block along West 145th. The podium has a base height of 85 feet, and both buildings rise to a height of 363 feet, not including the bulkhead. So between the 2 buildings, the development would include 866 to 939 dwelling units, between approximately 80,000 and 135,000 square feet of commercial floor area and approximately 44,000 square feet of community facility floor area, all serviced by an off-street accessory parking spaces and a below-grade facility. The development would include a new headquarters for the National Action Network and a new Civil Rights Museum with a tower top event space for private events for use by the museum, National Action Network, and community partners. Next slide. So I'll first just start by showing the existing site plan with the tax lots. As you can see, there are existing curb cuts along 145th Street. The zoning lot is comprised of 5 tax lots with approximately 68,800 square feet of lot area. Next slide. And this is the proposed site plan. So as you can see, the development covers the majority of the zoning lot area. You can see the 2 buildings orientation at the corner and the mid block. Next slide, please. So you might have noticed there was a range in floor areas when I was going through the project. That's due to the applicant proceeding with 2 different scenarios due to unknown market conditions. The proposed development would be constructed according to a residential podium scenario or a commercial podium scenario. The overall massing and building height will not change between the 2 scenarios. It's really just the balance of office or residential use in the base of building 1, where you can see there's some hatching there. In the office podium scenario, the commercial floor area for the proposed development would total approximately 135,500 square feet, or just under 2 FAR, and residential floor area would total approximately 646,000 square feet, or 866 units. Then in the residential podium scenario, would include approximately 80,000 square feet or 1.2 FAR of commercial, with a larger amount of residential totaling around 701,000 square feet or 939 housing units. Next slide. So the Civil Rights Museum and the event space stay the same in both scenarios. The Museum of Civil Rights will be a first of its kind institution committed to preserving and promoting knowledge of the historic and contemporary intersectional struggles for civil rights, political rights, and social justice in the Northern United States. The museum's gallery space will feature immersive multidisciplinary exhibits on the history of the Northern Civil Rights Movement and the contemporary social justice movements that continue to transform the social landscape of the United States. As a community-based institution, the museum's programming is being carefully curated to serve the Harlem community, in addition to being a resource and attraction for all visitors to New York City. Building 1, which you can see here in the foreground, would contain that banquet hall and event space located at the top story of the building to be used by the museum and by the public. The floor beneath the event space will be used as an accessory kitchen, storage, and staging area, as well as a possibly annexed banquet hall space. The space will be accessed through a small lobby entrance on the ground floor with a separate vertical circulation. Next slide. So to facilitate this development, the applicant is requesting the following land use actions: a zoning map amendment to rezone the project area from the existing C83 and R72 with a C14 overlay to a C46 zoning district. Zoning text amendments to map the size MIH and create a special permit to allow commercial uses on the site. 3 special permits with the newly created large-scale general development to modify the height and setback regulations, use regulations, and to waive required accessory parking. Next slide, please. And additionally, there will be 3 city planning commissioning certifications to waive retail frontage regulations and permit a total of 3 curb cuts. Next slide. So I'll start by going through the actions in more detail. Start with the zoning map amendment. So here's the kind of the before and after, showing the change from the existing C83 and R72 to a C46 zoning district. The C46 is an R10 equivalent district and has a maximum of 12 FAR. This amendment would allow residential and museum uses as of right, as well as a greater commercial density on the site. Next slide. This chart shows that increase in floor area, the change of permitted uses and height. As you can see, residential use was previously not permitted on the majority of the site in the C83 and now has a R10 proposed density of up to 12 FAR. Community facility has a max of 10 FAR and commercial density is limited to 3.4 FAR. Both buildings are designed pursuant to tower regulations and the building height is determined by the sky exposure plane. C46 does require a base height of 85 feet and setbacks of 10 feet along wide streets and 15 feet on narrow streets. Next slide. As the residential density would be substantially increasing on the site, would be mapped as an MIH area. This will result in the creation of permanently affordable units for the commercial podium scenario, either 217 to 260 with options 1 or 2 of MIH, and for the residential podium scenario, either 235 to 282 units of MIH housing pursuant to options 1 and 2. Next slide. As I previously mentioned, the top floor of Tower 1 would be a 30,000 square foot banquet hall to use as a commercial meeting space and event space. This will be used by the museum, the National Action Network, and external community groups and users. The story immediately below will be the accessory kitchen, storage, and staging area. And I've shown on the plan here, the outline in orange is showing where that entrance spaces at the ground floor with the vertical circulation taking you up to the tower top. Next slide. So to facilitate the location of this event space, the applicant proposes to modify the existing large-scale special permit to permit within a C46 zoning district in Manhattan Community District 10 commercial uses to be located directly above a story containing residential if an acoustical barrier that provides sufficient noise abatement is provided. The applicant believes that the location of the banquet hall at the top of the tower is critical to significantly enhance its prominence as a Harlem attraction with spectacular skyline views and will draw visitors to the museum and commercial activity in the area. Next slide. So the applicant would then be simultaneously seeking the special permit that would be provided by this text amendment, and as provided this detail of that acoustic barrier. The applicant believes that the story below the event space will be used almost entirely as an accessory kitchen, storage, and in addition to the construction of the floor ceiling assembly will ensure appropriate sound and vibration separation between the commercial banquet hall uses and the dwelling units below. Next slide. Relatedly, the applicant seeks the special permit to facilitate the event space to allow commercial use to penetrate the sky exposure plane. The C46 district permits developments to be built by tower regulations, given multiple findings, including that only the residential floor area penetrates the sky exposure plane. Next slide, please. As you can see here, due to the location of that banquet hall and event space, a portion of the commercial space does go beyond the sky exposure plane. The requested special permit will give this portion of the upper floors a use waiver, as the commercial space does not increase the overall bulk and will benefit the overall design of the large scale. Next slide. Finally, they are also seeking a special permit to modify residential accessory parking within a C46. Accessory off-street parking are required for 40% of the new market rate residential use units. As the site is located in a transit zone, no accessory off-street spaces are required for newly developed income restricted units. Next slide. So the plan here is just showing where that parking exists in the seller plan. The underlying regulations would require in the office podium scenario up to 260 spaces, and in the residential podium scenario up to 282 parking spaces. The applicant requests to waive 50% of the required residential parking. The proposed development would then include approximately 130 accessory off-street parking spaces and in the office podium and 141 spaces in the residential podium scenario, representing 20% of the market rate residential uses in each scenario. As the site is well served by public transit, including immediately adjacent to the 3 train station, the applicant believes this reduction will not have undue adverse traffic or other effects on the surrounding area. Next slide, please. I'll now briefly go over the City Planning Commission certifications. The C46 zoning requires that for street walls along wide streets, a minimum of 50% of the width of such street wall should be occupied by ground floor level commercial uses. Due to the program of the building, the applicant is seeking the City Planning Commission certification to waive these requirements. But I'll start by just walking through what is proposed for the ground floor and the street frontages. So here is the remaining retail use. As you can see, there is still substantial retail space on both the 145th Street and Lenox Avenue frontages. Next slide, please. Here are the two residential lobbies servicing building 1 and building 2 towers. Next slide. And here are the commercial and loading areas. So the blue would be the lobby servicing the commercial floor area in building 1, and then the loading on 145th and 144th Street. Next slide, please. And finally, this is the showing the museum and event space lobby and frontages along 145th. With the museum and event space entrances, the frontage is approximately 172 feet. Although this is not retail, it will be an active use and provide a prominent and welcoming entrance into the museum for the 145th Street frontage. Next slide, please. And finally, the two City Planning Commission certifications are for additional curb cuts. But I'll start again with this existing site plan. And there are many curb cuts existing along 145th. And then we realize there is actually an additional one on 144th that I have an image of in a moment. Next slide. Due to the program of the proposed development, the development is required to contain 2 accessory loading berths and 1 entrance to the underground parking. The applicant proposes 3 curb cuts servicing the proposed development. In C46, no curb cuts are permitted on wide streets and only 1 per zoning lot is permitted on narrow streets. Next slide, please. The CPC certification is required to locate a second curb cut on the narrow street at 144th. This will include the entrance into the parking for the full development and loading for building 1. Next slide. Placing the 2 curb cuts on 144th is preferred over the more heavily trafficked Lenox Avenue and 145th. And as you can see from this existing photo, there is a curb cut and some loading activity already on this frontage. Next slide. Certification is also needed to place a curb cut for loading of building 2 on the wide street at 145th. The applicant notes that this curb cut is located more than 100 feet from the most significant circulation area, the museum entrance to the east. Additionally, it would include audio-visual equipment to alert vehicle drivers and pedestrians to the presence of one another at this location. Next slide. This application does require EIS. They had the scoping meeting on May 10th of 2021. A notice of completion of the DEIS is slated to be issued on November 12th, prior to the November 15th target certification. The DEIS significant adverse impacts are still pending. There's ongoing conversations finalizing the DEIS, and I will be providing an update to the commission on that prior to the certification. The mitigation measures that will be identified in the DEIS will be explored further in the FEIS. Next slide, please. So to summarize, the actions that I just went through will facilitate the development of 2 buildings with over 860 housing units and up to 292 affordable housing units through MIH, a new Museum of Civil Rights and Tower Top event space, a new headquarters for the National Action Network, new commercial and retail space, and a below-grade parking facility. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie, for that thorough presentation. Are there questions from the commission? Vice Chair Knuckles, I see your hand.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. White. Do you know who are the architects designing the project?
I'm happy to follow up with this as well. I know that they're working with a very well-known museum curator, Ralph Applebaum Associates.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they're working with shop architects.
Shop?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'd like to have it probably for certification. I'm just curious as to the floor to ceiling height of the support space for the rooftop. That is the prep space and the kitchen, etc. I'm just wondering what the floor to ceiling height of that space would be.
Certainly, yes. I don't have that information, but can follow up.
Okay. Lastly, the rendering that you showed, the beginning and the closing rendering of 145th and Lenox depicts, I guess, the commercial option, right? As opposed to the residential option for that space above the ground floor, the 2 to 6 floor space. Is that correct? That's what the commercial space would look like if they go for the commercial option.
Yes, I believe so. So overall, the bulk doesn't, and the kind of the external design isn't going to change too much between the commercial and residential options. It's really just the balance of office versus residential use in the base. I believe that what's shown here, I'm not sure. I would have to confirm that they rendered the commercial option. I should have highlighted in my presentation the kind of glowing center portion of the area between the two buildings is that museum, that prominent museum.
No, understood. Yeah, I could make that up. All righty, thank you.
Hi, if I may. Hi, this is Edith from Manhattan office. I just wanted to confirm that the architect is indeed Greg Pasquarelli of Shop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Rampershad.
Thank you. I was just actually going to confirm too, it was Shop Architects. I was looking through our package that we have internally. I was just wondering if they can please provide the architectural floor plans for the residential portion, because I don't see it in our package. And also I just want to confirm, I noticed that they have a 30-foot wide curb cut on 145th Street for the loading. I'm assuming that's probably also because they have the residential lobby there. Is it 30 feet for the reason that I guess they assume the residential drop off, like when people get in deliveries, will also be at that location? Because on 144th Street, I noticed that they use a smaller curb cut of 22 feet. So I was just curious why they went 30 on 145th, if they can just clarify that.
Sure, I'll have
That was
to
it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, yes, I did not see anything about signage, and noting that this is a mid-block cultural anchor and would presumably need pretty significant signage. Have they looked at the existing signage regulations? Are those adequate? Generally, they're not for the kind of thing I imagine we're envisioning, but I also don't see any signage on the rendering. So, I'm curious whether this issue has come up for them.
Sure. Yeah, we did early in the process, we raised, signage. Perhaps I can have them provide more of a signage plan or include that in the renderings as they chose to not seek any signage waivers with this application.
Yeah, just procedurally, would that mean that they would have to come back to us for approvals?
If they are looking to do signage that goes beyond what is permitted as of right, yeah, they would need to come back to us with that.
So in an ideal world, this all goes together as one package, so they don't have to go through this process twice, right? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you, Annie. This is a pretty dramatic proposal, so it's kind of exciting to see something like this get started at this stage of the game. I'm curious to know the existence of the three-lane stop right at the corner there invites some questions about transit for this site. Is there any thought of bringing the subway station into the building or of using the other components of our recently approved Elevate text amendment to enhance transit at this location? I guess it's also dependent on what the EIS says about traffic impacts, and you'll tell us about that in a couple of weeks.
Right.
But has the MTA been consulted about this?
Yes, they were both consulted by us early in the process, and they have had recent post ZFA approval conversations with the MTA. The MTA has not designated this station as one that they are looking for an easement. I know that the site is just 3 blocks south of the 148th Street station, where there are I believe slated investments and improvements. So they've been focusing on that station, and they will be shortly or soon at some stage of the process, MTA will be sending the official letter to say that they will not be requiring an easement on the site.
Okay, okay. And then for the CPC for certification concerning retail continuity, which seems to make sense given the presence of the museum. But will we also be waiving, it seems to me, you mentioned the importance of activation of that frontage. I hope that, you know, if we're allowing the museum to take over what would be retail space, that it still has the transparency and activation that we expect retail to provide. Often museums have kind of blank walls because that suits them for the inside, but I hope this design leaves transparency at the museum entrance. Is that the plan?
Yes, and many of the kind of early renderings that we saw, they definitely intend the lobby space to be very open and public and welcoming. And I could have them follow up. I've asked about, you know, public access into the lobby, and I can have them follow up with that information and perhaps with a ground level rendering where we can see the proposed transparency.
I'd be interested in seeing that. And then just one last question. It seemed as in one of the renderings, there were some little tufty green things on top of the museum. Is there planned to be landscaped open space in the space between the two towers?
Yes, definitely could have called that out on the rendering as well. There is planned to have a landscaped open space that's in the kind of middle portion on the roof of the museum in between the two towers. There'll also be access for residents at each tower at the setback for their residential open space as well.
Okay, but so the open space on top of the museum, who's going to be using that?
I believe that would be for all visitors to the museum. It's associated with the
It's a component of the museum.
Mhm.
Okay, sounds pretty cool. Thank you.
Annie, I just had, the one observation I had is just a concern about the loading on 145th Street. And I'd like it if they could explain exactly how they plan on using it, because I wasn't envisioning it being used to drop off tenants. And if it is truly for true loading, I would encourage them to think about a loading plan, because 145th is a pretty busy street. And if we're allowing them to have it there, it would be helpful if they could limit use of it to certain hours. So I would like you to just speak to them about that. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So this will be back for certification, as Ryan indicated, later this month. Thank you very much, Annie.
Thank you.
Okay, Ryan.
Thank you. Just noting that we do have a quorum present. So the first item on our agenda is a post-hearing follow-up on the citywide zoning text amendment for open restaurants. DOT Commissioner Henry Gutman, along with Carolyn Grossman Marr and others, are here to discuss. Have everybody, there we go.
I'm recused.
Yes, and Commissioner Cirillo is recused. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ryan, and thank you, Chair Lehrman and commissioners. As you'll recall, we had a very lengthy and spirited public hearing on the open restaurants text amendment several weeks ago. Since many of the questions that were raised at the hearing were not specific to the content of the text amendment itself, but instead really regarding the overall implementation and program oversight of the future open restaurants program, we've asked DOT to join us for this post-hearing. We're happy to welcome back Commissioner Gutman and his team, who will discuss some of their overarching planning for that implementation. Before we turn it over to them to discuss, we just wanted to cover a few overall process updates and clarifications. Next slide, please. Great. So we'll just go through those process updates and then hand it over to DOT to cover the specific issues that have come up during program administration. Next slide. So first, we just wanted to note that a few additional community and borough boards have weighed in on the text amendment following the public hearing, with the result that 51 community boards citywide have acted on this text amendment. We have 18 votes in favor or favorable with conditions, 29 unfavorable or unfavorable with conditions, 4 boards waiving or issuing a statement of no objection. You can see the geographic breakdowns on the right, there are some notable clusters now, though we should also note that many boards were split votes, both at committee and at full board hearings, with many of the issues being raised being consistent, whether boards voted favorably or unfavorably. We've also had several borough boards act, with the Bronx Borough Board voting to approve, the Queensborough Board voting to disapprove. Both of those are still pending the reporting paperwork to the commission, but we'll provide those as we receive them. The Brooklyn Borough Board convened but did not have quorum, so we're expecting them to vote at their next session. Next slide. So a few other just notes on process updates, and I'll just remind again that there's multiple actions that are ongoing at the same time. The zoning text amendment, which we are of course discussing now, as well as a legislative process that will do two things: change the sidewalk cafe program, primarily transferring its control from the Department of Consumer and Workforce Protection over to DOT, as well as the creation of new body of law to create the roadway cafe program. And create that sort of armature. We wanted to relay that our understanding is that the drafting of those legislative components are well underway. We anticipate the introduction soon of legislation at the council, with the council relaying their anticipation that they will hold hearings on the legislation and the text amendment in tandem this session, assuming the calendars do allow for that. And we will share a draft of that legislation with commissioners for your awareness as soon as it is available to us. We also wanted to note that the interagency task force, which has been charged with reviewing the design concepts, particularly for the roadway elements, has been convened, and the first stakeholder meetings for that design process, which will continue until next year, are beginning in this month. Next slide. So a few additional, which I believe the commissioners know, but because there is so many moving pieces, we just wanted to continue to clarify that what the zoning text does versus the other legislative elements and rule elements. So the sidewalk text will make it possible for sidewalk cafes in the areas which are currently prohibited under zoning to have the chance to participate in the program. It does not, however, change the citing criteria for the cafes. For instance, the city has spoken at the pre-hearing about common sense changes like extending the clear path from 8 feet to 12 feet in highly congested areas. That is the intention of the city to do through rules. It is not a feature of the zoning, but it would be part of the city's overall proposal. So those are not subject to the action we're making, but they are part of the overall intention. And of course, also to continue to reiterate that the zoning does not affect roadway cafes, which are being implemented through that legislative process. The zoning does not affect the actions in the roadway. And so with those updates and clarifications, I'm pleased to hand the floor over to Commissioner Gunn to speak regarding the overarching program details. And we should flip to next slide.
I just did have one question, actually, Carolyn, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Or I just want to defer. Ryan, would you prefer that we take questions
well, this
together
is
at
just
the
a
end,
quick,
or are we?
It's just a quick question
Okay.
that's in your.
Carolyn, he can ask. Let him
wheelhouse,
ask. Yes, he can ask this question. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Please,
Brand.
Commissioner.
Oh, thank you. It's just, I'm thinking about the 29 community boards who voted to disapprove. And I think, as you pointed out in your early comments, that may well have to do with the fact that they are commenting on the whole process of the street cafes and so on, and not really on the ministerial process of the text amendment. So I'm wondering if that's the case. Is there any thought of going back to the community boards and clearing that misunderstanding up and perhaps having another vote on it?
Well, so we certainly haven't discussed going back on the text amendment, given that the procedures on the text amendment itself are clear. I think the city has absolutely discussed and committed to going to community boards for other elements of the program development as they as they are developed, particularly the design, which has now been rolled out, the expectation is that there would be community engagement for those processes. I would say, while there is, I think, some confusion at times about what elements are being voted on. Certainly there are folks who believe that the action that they were voting on is the entirety of the program. I would say for most community boards, they were clear that they understood that the actions was not specific, but that they felt it was important to make their views known about the entirety of the program, and the timing relative to other elements of the program being developed. So I think that was, and again, I would say the votes were very split, with a lot of mixed opinions about the the overall receptivity to the program, concerns about its administration, and the necessity of moving forward at this time versus waiting for other elements. So I think that hopefully that's so I think the intent is absolutely to go back and work with the communities, but with the expectation that the primary interest there is working on design and administration.
Okay, I just felt it was unfortunate to have an overwhelming negative vote that was based on a misunderstanding, but I guess there's no way to correct the record at this point. So thank you.
Great. If that was the
only
question for my component, I will again hand it to Commissioner Gottman.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, and thank you to Chair Laremont and Vice Chair Knuckles and to all the commissioners. We at the DOT are very grateful to have this opportunity to appear before you today to talk about what we consider to be a critically important program for the city of New York, and to answer any of your questions or concerns. Like our Open Streets program, this was a byproduct of the pandemic. In this case, it was an emergency reaction to what was life or death for the restaurants of our city, which are among our prized assets. 100,000 jobs, but also one of the many things that makes New York special and makes all of its neighborhoods special. And what grew out of this emergency reaction was the recognition that the people of New York wanted us to help them reclaim the streets, to put the streets to different uses than had been traditionally the case, where they were motor vehicle driven, motor vehicle dominated, whether it's bikes or it's mass transit or it's car share or it's open streets or it's open education or open culture, all the different programs. In this case, the open restaurant program was both a lifesaver for the restaurant industry and something which vast numbers of New Yorkers, whether or not it's reflected in the community board votes, view as something that should be part of the permanent life of the city. And to the DOT, this is one of our very top priorities, which is why we're here today. Now, I think that Commissioner Burney asked a very telling question. I think that to the extent that there has been opposition, and there is opposition, and we recognize that, it tends to be over the particulars of how a program was implemented during its emergency stage, or people's reactions to a particular restaurant in their neighborhood, rather than to the particulars of zoning, which are the subject matter jurisdiction of this entity. And I would add that on a certain level, while this is disappointing, and the community board votes were, it is not a total surprise. That is virtually everything we have done in reimagining the use of our streets has generated opposition, without exception. Whether it's open streets or bike lanes, any of these things that we've done have generated objections from somebody, whether it's people who preferred other uses of the same street space, or whether it's the fact that many in our community don't like change. Having said that, it is our practice, it is our policy, and it's our absolute commitment here that we listen and we respond and that when people raise legitimate concerns, particularly in a situation like this, where we're moving from a program that was a temporary emergency measure to respond to the extreme circumstances of the pandemic, and we're now trying to make it permanent. Obviously, we want people's input. We value that input, and that input is shaping what we're going to be doing going forward with the program. So the top topics are: the permanent open restaurants have to be good neighbors. This involves noise, this involves hours of operation, this involves respecting the rights of others to access to the sidewalk, et cetera, et cetera. They have to be safe. This involves issues like emergency access to the street, but also the construction and lighting and signage around the restaurants themselves. They have to be sanitary. Obviously, that is an issue that arises and has arisen in a lot of the objections that we've heard. That's something we're aware of and something that we're committed to addressing in making the program permanent. And then finally, enforcement. It's one thing to establish rules concerning how these open restaurants are approved and how they are governed and how they're to be operated going forward. But we also have to be committed to enforcing those rules and have the means to do so. All of those steps are included in the legislation that's pending, that's working its way through the council, in the various rules and processes that we're in the process of developing. We will have the resources, we will have the commitments, we will have the rules, and we will have the flexibility to adapt and amend them going forward if we need to, depending on circumstances as they evolve. So again, we are grateful for the opportunity to share with the commission what we're doing, what our plans are in this regard, and the efforts we're making to address the various concerns. And yes, we will be circling back and dealing with the community as we always do. I mean, it's always an ongoing process, and we are open and receptive to all of that. But we want to share with you today, before you have to make your decision on zoning, what it is we plan to do to address the concerns that you've heard during the course of this process. And again, we not only welcome your questions, but we welcome your ideas. If you have suggestions that have emerged from your listening to these to the hearings, we are all ears. We want to make sure that we do this right and that this is a permanent asset for the city of New York that we're all proud of going forward. Now, I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Julie Shipper, who's my Deputy Chief of Staff, and Judy Chang, who's the Director of Special Projects. They will run through a brief slide presentation addressing these issues, and then all of us are available to answer your questions. Again, I want to thank you on behalf of everybody at the DOT for giving us an opportunity to be here today. Thank you. Julie, it's yours.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. I'm going to, as the Commissioner said, I'm going to run through a few slides and then we're happy to take questions. And much of the content of these slides is questions that we've heard from the Commission throughout the past few months as we've been presenting to you. So first on the procedure, the Sidewalk Cafe and the Roadway Cafe, as we have mentioned before, will both be under DOT's provision, but will look a little different in their application process. So the Sidewalk Cafe procedure will be similar to what it has been under the DCWP program. So the restaurant would submit the application to DOT. We'd have an entire team of reviewers being able to review the application. The application would then go to the community board for their review, with an option for a public hearing and council review. And then finally, the restaurant, if through all of these different review processes was accepted, the restaurant would then sign the revocable consent agreement and a license agreement. So the Roadway Cafe, a bit different, as we're creating this program from scratch and going forward will not be a self-certification process like it's been during the temporary emergency program. The restaurant would submit the application to DOT as well. The DOT team again would review that application, and then there would be a public hearing and comment period similar to other revocable consent agreements that we have. We would then provide notice to the community boards of the restaurants that have been approved. And finally, the restaurant again would sign a revocable consent agreement and license. Next slide. So we know the big thing that one of the big things we've heard from you and from the community boards is how we plan to go forward with enforcement and what we've done to date. So I have all of the numbers here that you have asked for. So far we have completed 56,894 inspections. Out of those, and out of the restaurants that we have currently, 1,906 are not in compliance, but this includes restaurants that have been issued cease and desist letters. This includes restaurants that for a whole host of reasons are not in compliance. And I'll talk a little bit about this as we go forward, but so far we have been able to remove or fine 35 restaurants due to their incompliance. So in the temporary program, again, we want to really focus on the permanent program here and what we're planning to do in the future, but I do want to make very clear that we have begun to increase our robust enforcement here. So this includes fines to restaurants that are not in compliance, removals when restaurants are really egregious actors. And we're still being quite sensitive to restaurants here. We know that they're like still in a recovery form, but we are increasing and really increasing that robust enforcement and plan to continue doing so until the permanent program. For the permanent program, enforcement will look different than it has looked. So this will be part of our rulemaking process that's coming next year, when enforcement provisions will be included in all of that. And so this will include provisions about removal of non-compliance setups and penalty schedules for all of this. In addition, we are planning to add an open restaurants 311 complaint to foster that communication between what the community is seeing out on the street and where our inspections are being placed. Finally, we are, as we've been doing over the past year, but plan to do even more, working with other agencies to really complete our inspection. So we will have a full inspection team, but also plan to work with NYPD, DEP, and also DSNY on a number of different aspects of enforcement. Next slide, please. So we wanted to give you a little preview of what we're proposing that the protocol for inspections be. So this includes inspecting on or after the first weeks of the program starting, and then re-inspecting additional locations and re-inspecting after that initial inspection. So where we're seeing high density of open restaurant areas, we are planning to put additional inspectors in those areas to continue those inspections, and also include nighttime and weekend inspections. So it's not just 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, because we know that the restaurant industry does not operate during just during those hours. Once the season is over, we plan to have a final inspection to ensure that the locations have removed their setups, and a second round of inspections after that final day, just to really ensure that over those winter months when the program is not in operation, that those setups are out of the ground. Finally, we do plan to include, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, additional questions on noise in our inspection protocol. So we will be inspecting against amplified sound devices such as TVs, radios, live bands, etc. Next slide. So to give a little bit more information on what we plan to do for our non-compliance actors, again, this will be much more robust than it has been over this past temporary program, but we plan to, similar to what we do now, give that first initial warning letter, but then be pretty strict and harsh with the inspections after. So a cease and desist letter after that first warning notice, and then straight to terminations and summonses. So the summonses can be up to $5,000, and egregious locations will be able to be summoned immediately and also then set for removal. And there is a option if the restaurant is such an egregious actor and really has not been non-compliant, that the restaurant would be revoked from the program for up to 1 to 2 years. Next slide. So we know we have talked a lot about staffing, but as the commissioner had mentioned, we are planning to staff up for this. We have been funded for staff for this program, and under DOT, this will be broken into 3 main categories. So we will have a dedicated enforcement team that will do all of the inspections that I just laid out. Application and plan reviewers that will be reviewing the plans as they come in and reviewing the applications. And then corridor and parking planners. And so this is something that I think we've talked about in the past, but these are people that will be looking at corridors where there's a number of open restaurants, making sure that there's enough loading zones for the restaurants to get deliveries and other businesses on those blocks to get deliveries, making sure that there's enough parking set around the area, and just looking at the corridors and areas in general to make sure that we're really balancing the needs and the usage of those blocks. The mayor's office for people with disability are also hiring review planners to help with ADA compliance for this program. And just so everyone is aware, these job postings have been submitted and approved, and hiring has begun for a number of these positions. Next slide. So we know noise is one of the big topics that has been an issue throughout the temporary program. So one of the proposed hours for the permanent program will be what they were in the sidewalk cafe program previously. So up until midnight, Sunday through Thursday, and up until 1 a.m. Friday and Saturday. And one of the things that we've seen, and we think that why noise has been such an issue, is right now the emergency program, restaurants are able to be open until 4 a.m. At the latest, which quite late for anyone who is trying to sleep, and we know that has been a problem. So these hours are much earlier, and that will be enforced. Again, as I had spoke to before, DOT will also be enforcing for amplified sound, so TVs, speakers, radios, live band. And finally, again, we will continue to work with our partners at NYPD and DEP on all of these, on noise specifically, but on any issue that we see coming up. And we do plan to have additional inspections and enforcement in problem locations that we're seeing come up a number of times. Next slide. So cleanliness has been another issue that we are dealing with throughout this temporary program. So we have our colleagues here from the Department of Health to answer some questions and also speak on issues with vermin, but we are working very closely with them right now. One of the things that we'd like to include in our application and that we're proposing to include is potential standards on pest management. And this is something that restaurants need to comply with already in their indoor restaurants. And so we're hoping to include that in the outdoor restaurants as well. And then finally, as we go through our design guidelines and design guideline process, we do plan to include rules on cleaning and trash storage, which we think will help with some of the issues. I would like to turn it over now to our colleagues at DOH to talk a little bit more about cleanliness, and then we'll take your questions after.
Hi, good afternoon, commissioners. Can everybody hear me? I assume yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm Mario Merlino. I'm the assistant commissioner in charge of the pest control program. I'm joined by my colleague, Caroline Bragdon, who's our director for community programs for pest control. The city has a sidewalk cafe program currently. It's part of the health department, does restaurant inspections. Restaurant inspectors in that program look at sanitary conditions, primarily in the kitchen. We realize that the significant increase in the number of outdoor dining locations, the roadway setups, and the number of per block create new challenges. We've already put out guidance on best practices with focus on outdoor dining, and you could find that on our website. We also have a pest control program that looks at rats and cleanliness on the outside of restaurants. That's what we do. We're aware of problems in many areas, for instance, the West Village. We can't say for sure that some of the problems of proliferation of rats is related to restaurants. We do think that having better rules for trash and cleaning underneath the structures is advisable. We're looking forward to working more with DOT on ensuring that the design requirements of the roadway setups help with the control rodents. For instance, we want to make sure our operators are able to remove the platforms, clean underneath them routinely, ensure that the rules require trash carting and have certain requirements on that, and ensure that that the restaurants have pest management contracts that cover the outside of the restaurant where the structures are located. With that, if Caroline has anything to add, I could answer any questions, I guess, at the end.
Thank you very much. I think that there are a lot of questions from the commission. We do very much appreciate your presence here and speaking to the commission, both DOT and DOH. So I will turn to the commission. Commissioner Capelli, you had your hand up first, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To quote from the Grateful Dead, what a long, strange trip this has been. When this program got started in the midst of the pandemic, I was reluctantly supportive because of the need to help our businesses and also to get people the ability to get outside of their homes where they had been trapped, which was just so important for the vibrancy and the survival of our communities. There were some issues that I saw in the beginning, and I raised them. Some of them had to do with safety, and I was impressed by the diligence and the responsibility of DOT and the other agencies involved in addressing them. So, you know, as we evolve through this and I look at where we were and where we're at now, I'm kind of liking the shape that the city is taking, and kind of the reshaping of our streets and taking back and turning our neighborhoods into something that has a small town feel to it as well as a big city. And so I'm very supportive by your efforts and your responsiveness as we go forward. So I wanted to lay that out in front. I do have just one other question, and this is for DOT, is do they know how many currently existing and operating businesses under the temporary program will be excluded from sidewalk or street setups under this permanent proposal, giving the new siting criteria to clear path and footprints?
Julie, do you have a number?
I think actually, Caroline, you might have a number. I know between DOT and DCP, we've done a lot of work on this.
Sure. So I'm going to start by saying it's hard to say a specific number. And here's why. So we have right now over 11,000 emergency cafes operating. And remember that those are about 10,000 that are using the sidewalks, and another, I think, 9,000 or so that are using the roadways, and then the mix that are using both, right? So for the sidewalks, the primary limitation is likely to be the width of the sidewalk. The city has done some analysis of our own to look at the width of the sidewalks. And in general, we think 11 feet is about the practical limitation after which you can't have a cafe, because you need, if you're going to have 8-foot minimum clear, and some amount of just a single row and tables and chairs, really getting below an 11-foot sidewalk makes it difficult to imagine participation in the program. We think that there are about half of the existing sidewalk cafes that look like they're on a sidewalk that's less than 11 feet. So that could be several thousand restaurants that would be illegitimate, that may not be caught right now because they're being measured differently. However, our data is imperfect and could be imperfect in either direction, right? There could be less space on a sidewalk because there's more obstructions than we have digitally mapped, or there could be slightly more space. And in fact, the restaurant has 8 feet and our map shows it as having maybe 7.5 feet. And we don't want to make an assumption right now that they definitely couldn't participate, because it really matters, once you've gone and done the individual measurements on that site. The other thing, of course, is that if you're excluded from sidewalk, you may perfectly have access to roadway. And so that restaurant still may be able to participate in the program. And the third element I'll mention is that the waiver, which has been discussed, is a joint review between DOT and the Mayor's Office of Persons with Disabilities, which will allow going down to 6 feet in those limited circumstances where you might otherwise not be able to participate in the program. That introduces another element where there may be some conditions where your sidewalk doesn't look like it's wide enough, but actually maybe a 9-foot sidewalk would be, but we can't say until the specific conditions have been reviewed. So that is a long-winded way to say, we think there are many that will not actually be able to participate based on physical conditions. And that's a good thing, because ultimately we are moving towards a program that is not an emergency program, but really is prioritizing pedestrian flow with the expectation of making it as robust as possible with that balance in place. But it's hard to make that precise judgment because of all those variable features.
The one thing I would second that Carolyn said was her reference to the waiver. That is one of the things we've learned in all of these reclamation and transformation programs, is that it's not a cookie cutter business. And so we try to look at the circumstances in each particular case. And for example, if there were a sidewalk that didn't meet the presumptive width, but nonetheless, based on its characteristics, could function without disadvantaging the disabled or creating any safety issues, et cetera, that's exactly why we, working with your staff, came up with this idea of a waiver program, so that we'd be able to address the case-by-case differences.
Thank you, and for your presentation and the information. Keep on trucking.
Thank you. Vice Chair Knuckles?
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions. The first one of which I believe I posed this to Commissioner Gutman and Carolyn, and we had a conversation a few weeks ago post the hearing. And I want to bifurcate the roadside cafes, which have always been under the jurisdiction of DOT, and the sidewalk cafes. My question is, what is the rationale at the end of the day that propelled us to conclude that sidewalk cafes would be better left under the jurisdiction of DOT than CPC? What did we learn over the last 18 months that has led us to that policy determination?
I think I can start, and others please feel free to jump in. But I think the biggest thing is that having it under one agency where we can inspect both the sidewalk and roadway. We have a full inspection team under DOT, and really just making this one joint program while there are 2 separate processes for application. It's the same people that will be working on both the sidewalk and the roadway portion of this, and really seeing this as one large program rather than 2 separate entities with DCWP and DOT.
Yeah, I would, Vice Chair Knuckles, I would second that. I mean, one of the banes of my existence during my brief time as DOT chair has been discovering how balkanized jurisdiction is over virtually everything we do. The fact that when, take buses, take anything that the DOT is involved in, there are always multiple agencies with conflicting or lapping jurisdictions. And so if you're trying to fix anything, if you're trying to change anything, it's an incredibly convoluted process. So in this instance, as Julie said, when it's the same restaurant that may have both, and it's the same kind of circumstances that you're looking at, having them consolidated under a single agency, both allows for better and more consistent administration of the program, and avoids all of those turf issues which have plagued us in the past, and frankly have plagued us at times during the temporary emergency program as well. So that's the explanation.
So it's a user-friendly rationale at the end of the day.
Yes, and an efficiency and a competence. There will be a single agency that has the experience. Yeah.
If I may add, and I just want to make sure, the acronyms are very close, but just to continue to reiterate that the Department of City Planning was not administering the Sidewalk Cafe program. The Department of Consumer and Workforce Protection was administering it. The role of DCP and the CPC and the zoning resolution was primarily to prohibit areas of the city from participation in the program that DCWP was administering. So I think what's changed in our mind, aside from also the need to unify those two programs, which is really why DCWP's authority is being converted, is the realization that the zoning was prohibiting areas from participating in the program for reasons that weren't necessary, that it is possible to design a program that through siting and operational administration can make cafes work in those areas that we had just for many decades said no cafes. And I think it's the experiment of the emergency with its challenges that has allowed us to realize that those thousands of cafes that exist in areas where we had just said no via zoning were not appropriate. And it was a better idea to say presumptively yes, but let's have rules under the administering agency that make it possible to make those cafes a success.
Okay, well, speaking of that prohibition, because that's a good segue to the second question. In those areas that are have restaurants that are pre-existing non-conforming uses, and as I read this would now permit sidewalk cafes to operate in these areas that have zoning, which again, where the restaurants precede the current zoning. But can't be expanded because they're non-conforming use. Does this permission for sidewalk cafes undermine the zoning classification where they reside? Do you follow me? And that's for Carolyn.
Yeah, Carolyn. Yeah, thanks.
Don't believe it. Yeah, I'll take it, and then if Susan wants to jump in if I've mistaken anything on increasing nonconformance. But I think the primary issue here is that what happens on the sidewalk is a bit of a zoning ambiguity. And because we're talking about non-structures, we're talking about the ability to put a few tables and chairs outside an existing use. We believe that by removing that from zoning, we're able to separate that discussion from other forms of increasing non-conforming uses, right? So it would be different if, for instance, we were talking about introducing in full enclosures, right? If we were talking about bringing uses out onto the street and bringing more buildings out, that might be different. Whereas I think here, our point of view is that adding a few tables and chairs that are temporary and removable outside an existing restaurant does not undermine the ultimate idea that a residential district is a residential district, that this is ultimately a very limited case in those districts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. So I guess piggybacking on this question, we are talking about removing zoning restrictions that keep restaurants from often being in places that create conflict with residents. We heard quite clearly from many people, and one of the biggest issues that was raised was, noise, vermin. I mean, these are all things that residents reasonably have concerns about. That's the reason the zoning framework, I presume, existed, right, to prevent these things. I sort of chuckle, we just had a hotel permit situation where we've said, hotels have to go through a permitting process because they create impacts in neighborhoods. Well, so do these uses. And so we're now saying something different where restaurants shouldn't go through a process, even though they do create impacts, and we heard loud and clear that they do. So, I think there's an interesting contradiction there. But so I think that goes to
Sorry, Commissioner, I didn't want to cut you off.
Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to continue to clarify that there is a process and that there
Yes.
will be community board referral for the applications.
Correct.
But as you've said in the past, Carolyn, it's administrative. If you can prove that you meet the requirements, you will be able to do this.
No, there's full review of
It's
the process.
advisory,
It's
though.
no, it's not. It's
By community
The community
boards.
boards are advisory, but we will have a full review on the merits. And the difference between this versus zoning is this is one by one. It's not a blanket prohibition.
But we were told during the hearing that it is an administrative approval. If you can comply and your site meets these requirements, you will get this, right?
Well, the requirements cover all of the parameters and all of the considerations that you've mentioned, Commissioner. And what's more, what they get is a revocable license. So if even after the fact, and I'm not sure how this works in the zoning world, but even after the fact, if it turns out that they do not live up to the standards and they are not good neighbors and they become a problem, including through 311 complaints, which anybody in the neighborhood, they don't have to go to the community board, they don't have to go to us, they don't have to go to Oath, they can just phone it in. If it turns out that any of these restaurants fail to comply, fail to live up to those standards in terms of noise, in terms of sanitation, in terms of safety, plus we keep inspecting any of those things, we have the ability to revoke the license. So I understand your question, but I think this is one of the reasons why we believe that this is a more effective tool for pursuing exactly those values and objectives that you've outlined than would be going through the zoning process, even if you leave out the question of volume, and I have no idea what it would take for the City Planning Commission to try and issue variances for the thousands and thousands of restaurants that are currently participating in the program. But we're trying very hard to address exactly those issues on a proactive basis before issuing the permit, and then having the hammer of being able to revoke it if people don't live up to those standards. And we also have the ability to change, to adjust the standards going forward, consistent with administrative law, as necessary to deal with changing circumstances or problems that hadn't been anticipated.
So I think you led me to my question, which I had not yet asked. The DOT, so what you've outlined in terms of inspection by DOT, it seems to me, and maybe you can clarify this, is that, there is an inspection that occurs that, may or may not uncover the failure to comply with noise or hours or sanitation, right? Because noise happens at night. It doesn't, or, it doesn't necessarily happen when the inspection is going on. So could you clarify for me how, say, the open restaurants complaints are tallied, how those are tracked, how those will play a role in enforcement. And, you know, I mean, I imagine this is a software solution, and it's perhaps in the weeds, but I think we need to be very clear that if a community has complaints and they make those calls, that those absolutely, yes, will be incorporated into a system that will count against a business and that will in
Absolutely.
fact go towards the decisions that you make.
Sure. Julie, do you want to lay
Yeah,
out some of what we're
sure.
planning?
Yeah, so in addition to the 311 complaints and what we're setting up with them, we do already have an inspection tool, an inspection system that our inspectors are able to log everything they find when they're out in the field. And so this goes into a larger IT system similar to what you have just talked about. And we can see past inspections on every restaurant, issues with non-compliance, and be able to address it that way. We plan to do something similar with our 311 complaints, where we're able to get in whatever we get in from those complaints would go into the same system. So an inspector knows exactly what they're looking for and looking at when they go to a restaurant, and are able to check on that specific issue that has already come up in the IT system that they have access to.
But still, they might not encounter the noise issue, for instance, when
Sure,
they're
they may not encounter the noise issue right at that moment, but they'll see if there's amplified sound devices outside of the restaurant that would be the reason for the noise, and be able to inspect against that, and that would not be allowed.
So
They would be
hearing that noise issues were in part because of, you know, large groups congregating, people, you know, I mean, someone talked about, you know, a restaurant 5 feet from their window. They lived in a ground floor unit in the West Village.
So we think sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I'm just saying that the amplified noise wouldn't get at it. So I want to make sure that communities who complain about things that you might not uncover because the system, you know, your inspection system wasn't necessarily designed to do that. You know, if you're looking at amplification, for instance.
But not just amplification, as I had laid out previously, there will be inspections at night and on weekends. So I think that does go a bit to your point of us being there when some of these bad actors are happening and some of the issues are taking place. And again, like we have done in the past, but working with our partner agencies is something that, you know, we're continuing to do. But I do think that the inspecting on noise and hours, and I think hours is one of the big things. We've noticed that a lot of the noise complaints do come in after midnight, 1 a.m., and this program would not be administered after that time.
We would also go talk to the complaining people, right? So it's not just you go to the restaurant and take their word for it, or base your judgment on what you see at the hour of day that you get there. You would talk to the complaining, I want to call them witnesses, the neighbors who have the objections. And frankly, we're doing that today on a whole bunch of programs, including this. We get the complaints and we respond. This will be a more formalized process that'll make us better and quicker at it. But we already try to do that.
So I guess I would like to see, I don't yet feel like it's fully fleshed out, you know, and I do think that communities will want to know, you know, what that looks like. It's more fleshed out than it was before, but I still think there's some questions. And then the next thing we have not talked about, which is the fee. You know, I think that's really important in terms of the number of restaurants that participate, right? The amount of staffing that you will need, you know, increased staffing and inspection for thousands of restaurants. You know, there's a significant fiscal impact to this program, good and bad, increased sales tax from restaurants, but, you know, impact on communities and staffing, your staffing, for example. So what analysis has been done on that piece, and where have you landed with the kind of fee that will perhaps cover costs, support revenue for the city to cover those costs?
We have an analysis being completed right now. It is not done yet, an economic development analysis, and also revenue and to help guide us on exactly what the fees will look like, user cost analysis, and we will come back. We can come back to you with that. We just don't have it right now. We're working with OMB and also a consultant who's helping us with that process.
But the one thing I would add to that is that an important value from our perspective is that the fee structure, whatever it ends up being, not be one that cuts against our equity objectives. That is, the fees cannot be, how they relate to costs, all of that is obviously an interesting metric, particularly to OMB, but we're committed to doing this right. And we recognize that particularly if this program is going to be available in all neighborhoods around the city, without regard to their financial means, and whether it's you could set a fee structure for La Bernardin if they have outdoor dining. I don't even know if they do. That would be fine for them, but prohibitive for 99% of the restaurants in the city, including those that are beloved in local neighborhoods. So one of the things we are committed to is making sure that the fee structure doesn't price people out of this opportunity.
And I to your point on equity, I think, Carolyn, you mentioned that many businesses, restaurants may find themselves outside of this program because their site doesn't necessarily comply. And, this equity issue, wider sidewalks are often found in more affluent areas. So I just wonder how many of the restaurants that will likely be prevented from participating are going to be in lower income areas. So there are lots of factors related to equity, but I appreciate that. I do think it's a question we do need to answer, though. So thank you. I'll pass the baton.
Thank you.
I would
Thank
note
you.
that we have
And
not
I just
seen,
wanted to-
when we took a look. Sorry, I think I've got a bit of audio rehab, but just to say, we had not noticed that particular pattern of sidewalks that were too narrow for participation being only in affluent areas. In fact, many of the historic districts have some of the most narrow sidewalks as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to note, in response to your very early comments, Commissioner Ortiz, that, I think the question about taking this out of the zoning really has to do with a belief that we don't think categorically precluding this in neighborhoods is appropriate, that it is much more appropriate to look at the facts and circumstances and weigh them against the criteria that will be used in the rule to determine whether or not citing of an outdoor use here would be appropriate. And that really is part and parcel of trying to facilitate this use throughout the city. And that zoning is really not, it's really too blunt an instrument to use relative to this. And that's sort of a very fundamental aspect of why we're thinking that taking this out of the zoning is appropriate. But now, Commissioner Ramprashad, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions based on the slides that were presented today. I'll start with slide 6 and then I'll work my way. I have questions on slide 6 and 7 and 8. Looking at the Rollway Cafe, you're talking about restaurants. I own a restaurant, I submit my application. I just want to understand the process a little bit. And I know it's still being worked out, but if you can just explain just a little further, just so everyone out there that's listening in understands a little bit. I own a restaurant, I apply my application through DOT, the team reviews it. You say that's about 30 days. During that review process, I guess you send it to MOPD also for their review. If there's comments, the applicant has, which is the restaurant owner, would have to revise if necessary, resubmit it back to DOT for approval. And at that point, you're going to have a public hearing and comment period. How long is that public hearing and comment period? That's my first question.
The length of all of these processes are still being worked out, but the plan is to have them be as short as possible to really move this program and move the application process along.
Okay, so there's no time period like 30 days or something like that.
We don't have it. We don't have it yet.
So moving on to slide number 7, my question was, I noticed that the inspections to date, 56,890, that's a lot. I was just curious, what was the time frame of these inspections? When were they conducted?
That's from the very beginning of this program. So back in July of probably mid-July of 2020 until now.
Okay. And sticking with that, Commissioner Ortiz touched on it with this 311 complaint system. I'm just curious, how long does it take for that 311 complaint to actually be processed? Like, when I call up and I complain about sanitation, they say 7 to 10 business days. And as you know, if they're complaining about it, you guys were briefly talking about it, it happens at night, you're not going to come out there the next day. What is the actual turnaround time for DOT to come out there and inspect?
I mean, when we've been getting complaints, we have been doing it within the same, I don't want to promise the very next day, but it has been within a day or two. Like, we are very, very quick with our inspections, hence having so many of them, and having done so many. We have an amazing team here that is really, really, they're out on the ground, they're out in the city and really working very hard around the clock to do these inspections.
So that also leads me to this next question. Department of Buildings has a database where someone calls and complains, you can see it. It's public record. Everybody sees it. You type in the address, you see it. Number of complaints, and when the DOB has come and inspected that. Will DOT have that same type of database? You briefly were talking about the system that you're developing. Can I access that through the DOT website? When it's up and running?
At this point, no, but it's a good suggestion to take back, and we can see if it's possible to have this be something that is public.
And one more question, because I know there's still other questions from other commissioners. I'm just curious, and I know Commissioner Ortiz also mentioned it. She wasn't looking at my notes, but she did mention it. With regards to hiring, the number of examiners and inspectors, what is the number you guys are looking at? Because obviously, as you know, as you mentioned, there were a lot, over 10,000 applications, right? Both for the sidewalk and the street. How many inspectors are you looking at to hire? And how many do you currently have right now that are doing inspections?
All of our inspectors currently were taken off of other jobs, and have now been splitting their time between open restaurants and other inspection jobs that they have. This will be a full team of people. So we'll have upwards of 12 inspectors that will be working on this, and potentially more if we're able to get funded for more.
That's 12 for all 5 boroughs? That's okay.
That is what we've been funded for so far, but that does not include our reviewers in the office, and other staff that will be working on this program.
And just one last question. I know on slide 8, it's talking about once the season is over. What is a season considered? Is that something that's going to be clarified?
Yes, that will be clarified within our rules and guidelines. What we've been saying is the winter season is when we wouldn't have this, so that other operations such as snow removal, other construction that needs to happen, roadway work, all of that can be done as well. We're figuring out exactly what that date will look like, but the colder months is what we've been saying publicly.
And so I have one more last.
Yeah, go ahead.
With regards to the fines that are issued, if the summons is it issued to the person who applied for the application, the restaurant person, or is it to the building owner?
To the restaurant application.
Specifically or strictly to the restaurant? Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Dweck.
Thank you. I think most of the questions have been asked, but I have a question from the other side. With the increase in inspections and enforcement, will there be an ombudsman for these small businesses to help them navigate the process? And additionally, which agency will be adjudicating their summons should they get one?
I believe Oath is the Oath will be adjudicating, and we will have staff that I think can help with this, but I believe Oath may also be able to help restaurants in this process.
When you say help, do you mean guide them through the process
of going through after they've been issued a summons?
Okay.
So Oath would deal with this.
So if I might add.
Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Oh, just to add that I think that the Department of Small Business Services and the Office of Nightlife have been remarkable partners in the emergency program, particularly SBS running a hotline where they've been walking restaurants through how to apply and how to deal with some of the most common objections. And so, I think the goal is, that people don't get to oath, right? The goal is that for most people, or if you get to oath, it's only the bad actors, right? That people have every opportunity to understand and work with people who can help them. And certainly that, that first and foremost falls on DOT in the rules and communication. But I think some of the other agencies, particularly SBS, again, that works so closely with bids already, has been a tremendous partner, and one would expect would remain a very strong partner.
Right.
My concern is a lot of these, sometimes these summons are written in cryptic words where I think you need someone to help you explain it to you. So I'd like to see from the agency side, especially since we're dealing with very small businesses, some kind of ombudsman that can really walk them through the process and help them. And of course, deal with issues that might arise from false complaints, which could happen too. I mean, we have to take everybody. So I'd like to see someone help them navigate the process. If you're going to be hiring staff and there's funds allocated, perhaps dedicate one staff to really be available to help these restaurateurs, and multilingual would help get them through this process to deal with any issues that might come up.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Commissioner Edie.
And thank you again for the presentation. I found it most helpful. Regarding sidewalk cafes, I noticed for public hearings, there was a comment regarding that they would either have public hearings and or council review. And I wasn't sure how the decision would be made as to one versus the other, or whether or not there can be a commitment made to have public hearings for all the sidewalk cafes.
I can take this one. So it's not a decision point per se. It is the requirement under the charter for how the review proceeds. The council has a call-up action, as they do often with certain types of land use actions. So the council may elect, is the way it is phrased. I think working with the council is the anticipation to see how that has worked. In practice, in the past, they had called up most, if not all, cafes under the DCWP process. On the other hand, that adds length, and review time to the process. So I think there's interest in revisiting that, but the requirement that they have the potential to call up the sidewalk cafes is part of their charter authority.
So just for clarification, is the intent that if the council is intending to call it up, there wouldn't be a public hearing, or would there be a public hearing and possible council call up? It wasn't, I guess my question is, will there be public hearings for the sidewalk cafes?
I think that the language may have been deceptive. There's a community board level hearing, and then there's also the council potential to call up. So they're two separate parts of the process. I think the anticipation is, yes, that there would be a public hearing, unless it was so controversial that both of those bodies declined to do so.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I think that helped.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you. Boy, my impression is that you all have been very busy and very attentive and very creative during the couple of weeks since we held our public hearing, and that makes me feel a lot better about this. I will observe, it seems to me you all are going to have to really redouble the efforts to establish DOT's reputation as an agency that cares about quality of life in addition to the movement of traffic. And Commissioner Gutman, you're a champion of that, and your opening remarks are very reassuring on that point, but we have a public that hasn't yet seen this new DOT. And we heard a lot of testimony at the hearing about how DOT was the absolute wrong agency to put in charge of this. So I just really hope you work hard on, first off, getting the program right, and then really rolling it out with aggressive PR and concrete steps to demonstrate to the communities that have been beleaguered by the emergency program that you're for real and that you're going to pay attention to the kind of quality of life stuff that you've indicated in this conversation you do care about. But you got work to do in the public to make that stick. I just want to revert to a couple of zoning questions because that's what we do here. First a detail and then a bigger question. We heard in the hearing that in addition to allowing sidewalk cafes in residential areas where they're not currently, and other areas where they're not currently allowed, you're going to be removing a couple of provisions that required eating and drinking establishments to provide service inside for seated patrons. And that when those get stripped out of zoning, we're going to have people standing up outside and open facades to buildings. Is that in fact happening here? Are we taking out those zoning provisions? The folks were referring to 32.411 and 52.34.
Yeah. So yes, there is a place in there where the word seated appears. We are not aware, and in our conversations with DOB, that anyone has been using that particular provision to actually enforce seating of patrons. The seating of patrons is a requirement of the sidewalk cafe licensure, and part of the diagramming out under DCWP and presumably under DOT is to show where your tables and chairs are within the cafe. So we do believe that that's an appropriate way to do that. It's not typically a function for the obvious administrative challenges that DOB would be looking to see whether patrons are seated inside of a restaurant. And so we don't believe that that was a, that particular word featuring in the zoning was important to the ultimate outcome of having patrons in a cafe be seated and to avoid that sort of mosh pit or sort of overdense quality to the cafe.
Okay, and how about the open facades? The garage doors rolling
so that
up and...
that is part of, yes, that is part of the amendment. Under C2 and higher commercial designations, you can have a garage door or a partitioned wall that allows for that perforation. C1 and C5 did not allow for that that perforation. As part of the text, we did put that through to allow for a more we thought rational relationship between the interior and the exterior restaurants where it is called for. And so that was the intent behind the takeout windows and the unenclosures, is to really make it the same as the other C districts. I think we mentioned we got comments on both sides of that equation, some that said, no, leave the C1 districts alone, and some that said, why aren't we just letting any use open up its front? It seems like a sort of modern way to operate a business, and why would we only limit that to restaurants or restaurants participating in the cafe program? But again, really our intent was to rationalize that to the other C2 regulations.
Okay, yeah. I would just observe that then raises some complicated enforcement questions, of course, because the noise issue is that you can have loud music being played inside that then leaks into the outside and is not generated by the sidewalk cafe. So maybe it wouldn't be enforced by DOT, but it needs to be enforced by someone because it's booming up and down the street. But let me ask my sort of bigger zoning question, which is that we heard plenty at the hearing of question about why we're moving forward now to remove the zoning provisions before we have the permanent program in place, that we're putting the cart before the horse. And we could end up in a situation where we have no rules at all because the legislation doesn't get done, or, I mean, who knows what might happen. But why are we moving the text amendment so far ahead of the legislation? Or why can't they go side by side? Or why can't the text amendment be removed only once the permanent program is, the legislation is complete and the permanent program is available? Seems like you wouldn't take your belt off before you put on your suspenders.
Sure. Well, I'll start a response, please, Commissioner, if you have other thoughts to add. Certainly, I'll say two things. First, I think as we heard, or as we relayed, it is our understanding that the council would review the legislation and the text amendment in tandem. So, part of this is a chicken and egg, on calendaring. But the council, our understanding, would like to transfer authority, there's sort of meta concerns about the sidewalk cafe rules, and further act on the roadway, at the same time here. So it is true that we are in a position where the commission may be acting first. We hope that those ultimately do sync relatively well. The second I would point out is, again, we're not left with, on sidewalk cafes, no rules. We have a lot of rules that are on the books. The council legislation would amend them to transfer the authority, but the text amendment itself is not acting, in a vacuum. It is acting on that existing body of law. The worst case scenario would be that, these are changes that happen to a different agency. But again, that's not our expectation or intent. Our understanding is that the legislation is moving through its own parallel process rather quickly.
Okay, well, maybe may get lucky and they end up at the same time. But the effect of removing the text amendment is that you're allowing sidewalk cafes in the most sensitive areas, the areas where they have not been permitted before, residential areas. And I just think we heard a lot of concern about the propriety of doing that before the rules are in place to protect those communities.
The only thing I would add is that my understanding is the same as Carolyn's, that the intent is that these will move in tandem and that neither is going to happen without the other. Again, we have lots of examples of how people get worried about that. I don't mean to go there, but that is certainly the expectation and the clear intent of all involved. And then the second thing is, Commissioner, I want to thank you for your original comment. Believe me when I tell you that I am painfully aware of the credibility issue that you raised, and we're trying every day to address it. And talk's nice, actions speak louder than words, as we were all taught. And I would ask that you judge our actions, because we are trying to live those principles, and we will make sure they're properly publicized. But in the end, I'm hoping that we'll be judged by our actions in that regard. And thank you for the comment. It's right on point.
I've been tremendously reassured by your leadership since you became commissioner, that across all avenues, many aspects of DOT's work, you're a ray of sunshine. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, commissioners, for your really thoughtful questions. And I very much appreciate the time that you took, Commissioner Gutman and Ms. Schipper, to speak to the commission. So we will take back these concerns, and I hope we'll have another opportunity to chat with you about the issues that you raised today. Thank you. Okay, Ryan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The third item on our agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in the Bronx Community District. Oh, sorry. Second item on our agenda, jumping the gun here, is a certification of a UDAP designation and disposition of city-owned property and site selection in Manhattan Community District 6. Our presenter is Askin Mohadeen.
Good afternoon, commissioners. This application is filed by the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development and the Department of Homeless Services to facilitate an as-of-right building that will house a women's shelter, supportive and affordable housing, and a medical clinic. The site is located at 215-225 East 45th Street in the East Midtown neighborhood of Manhattan Community District 6. Next slide, please. The applicant is requesting two actions from the City Planning Commission. The first is an Urban Development Action Area project designation and approval pursuant to Article 16 of the General Municipal Law and disposition of city-owned property. The second is a site selection pursuant to Section 197C of the New York City Charter to modify an existing capacity restriction on the site. The two actions will enable the as-of-right development of a 21-story building, illustratively shown on the right, which will house a women's shelter, supportive and affordable housing, as well as a medical clinic. Next slide, please. 225 East 45th Street is located on the block bound by East 46th Street to the north, 2nd Avenue to the east, East 45th Street to the south, and 3rd Avenue to the west. The development site is mapped with C64 and C53 zoning districts. A portion of the site is also within the East Midtown subdistrict of the Special Midtown District. The surrounding area is characterized by high-density commercial office buildings with ground floor retail uses to the west and transitions to more residential uses to the east towards 2nd Avenue. The area is served by Grand Central Station, located approximately 3 blocks to the east, providing access to the 4, 5, 6, 7, and shuttle subway lines, as well as the major terminus of the Metro North Railroad. Next slide, please. Here's some visual context of the surrounding high-density commercial and residential area. The aerial image on the right is looking north. The project site is outlined with a dashed red line. Next slide, please. The project site has a total lot area of 10,000 square feet and 100-foot long frontage to East 45th Street. In 1993, the City Planning Commission approved an application by the Department of General Services and Human Resources Administration for site selection and acquisition of properties located at the development site for use as a transitional housing for single women. The site selection approval imposed a capacity limit of 150 beds as a condition of approval. The site is currently approved with 2 buildings outlined here in red. On the left is a 4-story building on lot 8, constructed in 1900, and on the right, a 6-story building on lot 11, constructed in 1939. The buildings have been internally connected to house 130 homeless shelters for women struggling with substance abuse. The on-site services include a primary care clinic and emergency housing. The shelter has been operated by Project Renewal since 1998. Next slide. The requested actions will enable an as-of-right development, which is expected to be a 217-foot tall building comprising of 117,000 zoning square feet or 11.78 FAR. Approximately 34,000 square feet will be dedicated to a purpose-built shelter space, expanding the existing 130 shelter beds to provide approximately 170 beds for single adult women. Approximately 79,600 square feet would support 130 affordable housing units plus a superintendent's unit. All would be studio units. Of those 130 units, 79 would be supportive housing for formerly homeless individuals and 51 would be for other low-income individuals and households earning up to 60% of the area median income. A medical clinic would occupy 3,600 square feet on the ground floor. The clinic will serve residents of the proposed development and the public. Project Renewal is the operator of the existing shelter and is expected to operate the expanding shelter in the future. Project Renewal currently operates 23 housing programs serving over 2,000 individuals a day throughout the city. These programs include crisis services, specialized shelters, transitional housing, supportive housing, and affordable housing. Next slide, please. The proposed shelter will provide amenities that include kitchen areas, dining areas, and laundry rooms. Amenities for occupants of the residential units include a multi-purpose recreation room and laundry facilities. Occupational therapy rooms are also provided on the ground floor for use by the medical clinic and shelter. A shared outdoor terrace on the 2nd floor will be available for affordable housing and shelter residents. Next slide. As you can see from this neighborhood character drawing, the proposed building highlighted in yellow here would not be out of character from the adjacent buildings on the mid-block along 45th Street. Next slide, please. In summary, the applicant is requesting 2 actions to facilitate an as-of-right shelter and housing development. First, an urban development action area project designation, approval, and disposition of city-owned property. And second, a new site selection to remove an existing capacity limit on the shelter use on the site. In connection with the requested actions, HPD has done an environmental review and issued a negative declaration determination. As required for the site selection, DHS has done a fair share analysis and deemed the shelter use appropriate for the site. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Are there any questions from the commission? Okay, I don't see any. Oscar, I guess you gave a very thorough presentation, so thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see this when it comes back. Thank you very much.
This is certified.
Yes, certified.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. The third item on our agenda, now we're on the third item, is the certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in the Bronx Community District 1. Our presenter is Justin Lamarella.
Thank you, and good afternoon, commissioners. Our Lady of Pity Apartments, LLC, is seeking a zoning map amendment and zoning text amendment to facilitate the development of 2 9-story residential buildings, totaling approximately 200 5 dwelling units at 272 East 151st Street in the Melrose neighborhood of Community District 1 in the Bronx. Next slide, please. The applicant is Our Lady of Pity, LLC, and is an affiliate of the Association of New York Catholic Homes, which is the housing development office of Catholic Charities of New York, which develops safe, affordable housing for families and seniors through the creation of new housing and preservation of existing units. To date, Catholic Charities of New York has developed 13 buildings with over 2,700 units of affordable housing for families and seniors. They are proposing a zoning map amendment from an R6 to R7A zoning district and the creation of a new MIH area at the site of the former Our Lady of Pity Church. Next slide, please. The surrounding area has a mix of residential, commercial, and community facility uses with a diversity of building types and scales. Generally, the built form is low-rise 3 to 5-story buildings located within the mid-block along the side streets, and mid and high-rise buildings located along the avenues. However, taller buildings are dispersed throughout the area, including a few mid-rise buildings at the mid-block and corners and north side of East 151st Street. Larger residential developments with building heights of 11 and 21 stories are located between Morris Avenue, Park Avenue, East 149th Street, and East 153rd Street. The surrounding area is predominantly in R7 or R7 equivalent zoning districts. To the west of the proposed rezoning area, there is an R72 district with a small C12 commercial overlay along Morris Avenue and East 149th Street. A C44 district, which is an R72 equivalent to the south and east, an R71 district to the north, and an R6 district to the east. The area is located within the transit zone, served by bus, subway, and commuter rail lines. The 2, 4, and 5 subway lines are located a few blocks south at 149th Street. The BX32 bus runs along Morris Avenue, and the BX2, 9, and 19 run along 149th Street. And the Melrose Metro North Station is located 4 blocks north of the proposed development site. Also to the north of the project area is Governor Smith Playground, which includes a track and football field. And not reflected on this map, but a rezoning to extend the C14 commercial overlay north along Morris Avenue was recently approved by the commission and is at City Council. Next slide, please. 272 East 151st Street was the former home of the parish of Madonna del Suffragio, or Our Lady of Pity. The church, including a rectory and school, was built in 1929, serving first the Italian and later the Puerto Rican communities of Melrose for decades. On November 30th, 2017, the church was deconsecrated by the Archbishop of New York due to the deteriorating state of the building and the immense financial burden of repairing it. The site was fully demolished between 2020 and 2021 and currently sits vacant. The development site itself is 70 feet east of Morris Avenue. It is comprised of lot 14, which is a through lot, and lot 72 and 77, with a total lot area of approximately 40,000 square feet. It has 200 feet of frontage along East 150th Street and 100 feet of frontage along East 151st Street, both narrow streets, and has a depth of approximately 235 feet. The non-applicant owned lots are lots 1 and 3 through 9 along Morris Avenue between East 150th Street and East 151st Street. Lot 1 is improved with a 4-story building. Lots 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 have 3-story buildings and are mixed use with residential upper floors and ground floor community facility uses or retail. And those uses include a medical office, a dental office, a hair and nail supply, 2 delis, a pharmacy, 3 restaurants, and a laundromat. The oldest building is located on lot 5 and was constructed in 1899, and the newest is located on lot 8, constructed in 1932. Today, the proposed rezoning area includes an R6, a C14 district, and an R6 zoning district. R6 districts permit a residential FAR of 2.43 and community facility FAR of 4.8. C14 commercial overlays allow for local retail uses with an FAR of 2.0. Next slide, please. So the next few slides show some photos of the area. So this particular photo is showing the development site looking south from 151st Street. Next slide, please. And here we have the opposite view looking north from 150th Street. Next slide. And this shows the part of the rezoning area that is not the development site along Morris Avenue. You can see the building closest to us at 150th and Morris Avenue is a building that is currently overbuilt and would be brought into compliance by the rezoning. Next slide. So the applicant is proposing 2 9-story, 205-unit, 100% affordable residential buildings. One building will be built fronting on East 150th Street, and the other will be built fronting on East 151st Street. The buildings will reach a total height of 9 stories. They'll provide a landscaped interior courtyard for open space between the 2 buildings in the middle of the development site, which will have both active and passive recreational spaces, including turf areas for children's play. The proposed development will have a total FAR of approximately 4.5, with approximately 205 dwelling units. It is located within the transit zone, and therefore no parking is required and none will be provided. The buildings will be 100% affordable using financing by either the state or the city. Next slide, please. In order to facilitate this development, the applicant requests a zoning map amendment change from an R6 to an R7A zoning district. R7A zoning districts have a max FAR of 4.6 with a max height of 95 feet. The proposed district would be consistent with the maximum building heights in the surrounding area for buildings in the adjacent R71, R72, and C44 zoning districts. And the project area is located within the transit zone and close to a well-connected mass transit corridor. Next slide, please. The applicant seeks a zoning text amendment of Appendix F of the zoning resolution to classify the project as a mandatory inclusionary housing designated area. The applicant proposes both MIH options 1 and MIH option 2. This would require that 52 to 62 of the 205 proposed units be permanently affordable, depending on which option is selected. And for reference, the median household income in the approximate neighborhood tabulation area is $26,800 per year. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, Our Lady of Pity Apartments LLC is seeking a zoning map amendment and zoning text amendment to facilitate the development of 2 9-story, 100% affordable residential buildings with 205 units in the Melrose neighborhood of Community District 1 in the Bronx. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Justin. Are there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Ramprashad.
Yeah, just want to thank you for the presentation. I didn't see any in our briefing package, but could they provide the plans for the building and also the unit breakdown of how many 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms? Thank you.
They did not provide that level of detail because there's no site control of this or site plan review of this particular project. But we can certainly follow up with them, and as they work through those details, see if they can provide that at the public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? Oh, I don't see any more. So thank you, Justin, and this item is certified.
Okay. The 4th item on our agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in Queens Community District 13. Our presenter is Scott Solomon.
Great. Good afternoon, commissioners. Great. So this is a private application by Ranvier LLC seeking approval of a zoning map amendment from R32 to R6A with a C22 commercial overlay and zoning text amendment to map MIH to facilitate development of a mixed-use 8-story building consisting of approximately 42 dwelling units and approximately 4,000 square feet of ground floor retail located in the Springfield Gardens neighborhood of Queens Community District 13. Progress to the next slide. Continue on to the next slide here. The project area sits on the eastern side of the Geyer Brewer between 147th Avenue and 146th Terrace. 147th Avenue is an 80-foot wide street, serves as the boundary between a R32 district on the north side containing the project area, and to the south an M11 district that is generally coterminous with the JFK IBZ. Guy Brewer Boulevard is an 80-foot wide arterial with a north-south orientation connecting JFK Airport, located a quarter-mile to the south of the project area, to downtown Jamaica, 3.5 miles to the north. The surrounding area has two distinct land use forms. North of 147th Avenue, within the R32 district, are comprised predominantly of two-story, 1 and 2 family homes. On the east, on both the east and west side of Guy Brewer are non-conforming 1 and 2-story commercial buildings. Several community facility buildings are located in the area, including PS 52, 1 block north, and a family homeless shelter on the west side of Guy Brewer. South of 147th Avenue, immediately across the project area, is a 4-story hotel. Several low-density industrial uses, mostly transportation and distribution, primarily related to the nearby airport, and some 2 to 3-story non-conforming residential buildings are in the surrounding area. 3 local bus routes run north-south along Guy Brewer and are served by 3 bus stops at the proposed project area. 1 mile north and northeast of the project area are the Locust Manor and Laurelton Long Island Railroad stations, and the project area is located half mile south of the Belt Parkway. Next slide. The project area contains 7 lots, 5 entire lots fronting Guy Brewer, including the development site on the corner lot, lot 12, and small slivers of lots 25 and 10. Lot 12, the development site, is an approximately 4,000 square foot vacant lot with 102 feet of frontage on Guy Brewer and 97 feet along 147th Street. The other lots fronting Guy Brewer include non-conforming commercial uses and open parking, and lots 10 and 25 both contain detached 1 and 2 family homes. PS 52 to the north, hotel to the south of 147th Avenue, medium density homeless shelter across the street, low density residential that predominates the area. Next slide. Following photos of the current conditions, on the left, the view of the development site in the intersection of Guy Brewer and 147th Avenue. On the right, a view of the development site facing southeast from Guy Brewer. Next slide. On the left, view of the development site facing northwest from 147th. On the right, a view of Guy Brewer Boulevard facing south, the project area to the left. Next slide. On the left is a view of 146 Terrace facing east from Guy Brewer, project area to the right. And on the right is a view of the west side of Guy Brewer Boulevard facing northwest away from the project area. Next slide. In terms of the proposed development, applicant is proposing a new 35,000 square foot, 8-story mixed-use building with approximately 4,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space and 42 dwelling units on floors 2 through 8. Applicant intends to map both options, MIH options 1 and 2, but plan to pursue option 1, which would require approximately 11 permanently affordable units. 23 attended parking spaces are proposed, 21 would be required. Parking would be waived for the commercial units when they are less than 15 required. Less than 15 would be produced here. The portion of the building within 25 feet of the other commercial uses to the north of the development site are allowed to rise to a maximum of 4 stories, as represented in the illustrative drawing above. The balance of the base height that wraps around the corner is 6 stories, and then after a setback rises to 8 stories. Next slide. Above is the site plan, illustrative site plan drawing. 4 stories on the northernmost portion. On the left, 6-story base fronting the rest of the corner, rising to 8 stories after setback. Parking is located within side and rear yard equivalent with access and egress from 147th Avenue. Next slide. There's another illustrative drawing, ground floor plan, illustrating the 4,000 square feet of commercial space across 4 proposed commercial units. The intended parking uses stackers within 8 spaces to accommodate the total of 23 spaces. Next slide. In the illustrative elevation above, 43 feet for the 4-story portion, rising to 63 feet for the 6-story base. And then after the setback, a maximum building height of 83 feet, 85 feet would be allowed. Next slide. In order to facilitate the proposed building, applicant requests a zoning map amendment, changing the existing R32 district to R6A and establishing a C22 commercial overlay. R6A districts in MIH areas allow a residential FAR of 3.6 and 3.0 for community facility uses. Next slide. And then the second action proposed is a zoning text amendment to map both MIH options, again, 1 and 2, which would produce approximately 11 permanently affordable units under option 1, the preferred option for the applicant. And finally, I think move on to the next slide, final slide. The rationale for the proposed rezoning is to facilitate housing production on an underutilized site fronting 2 wide streets to meet the growing demand for multifamily housing consistent with Housing New York. The ground floor retail would also serve to activate the street frontage and enhance pedestrian experience compared to the current open parking or any as of right R3 development. Concludes the presentation and have to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Are there any questions? So I'm not seeing any, so I will say this item is certified. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you.
The 5th item on our agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in Brooklyn Community District 5. Our presenter is Alexander Padiguias.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an application to facilitate the development of a new 7-story mixed-use building containing air units and a daycare center, fulfilling a commitment made on the East New York rezoning. Next. The applicant, Cypress Hill Local Development Corporation and Manny Management, are requesting a zoning map amendment to establish an R7A C24 EC6 and an R5 districts within an existing R5 C23 district, and a zoning text amendment to amend Appendix F to establish a new mandatory inclusionary housing area and to extend the special enhanced commercial district 6. Next. The project area is in East New York neighborhood of Brooklyn Community District 5, specifically in Cypress Hill. At the northeast corner of Fulton Street and Euclid Avenue. The site is located just outside the eastern boundary of the East New York rezoning area. Some developments that have been facilitated by the neighborhood plan are located within the surrounding area. Right diagonal south to the project area is Phipps Houses, which started the construction of its first phase to build approximately 1,600 affordable housing units. Next to it, on Atlantic Avenue to the west, we can see Dismore Chestnuts. It's an HPD development that is near completion and will provide approximately 275 units of 100% affordable housing, along with a community facility and retail spaces in the ground floor. And next to it, it's the school PSIS C67, which opened last year, and approximately 1,000 students are attending. This area is also well served by public transit. The elevated JC trains that link Jamaica with the financial district runs directly adjacent to the project area above Fulton Street, with an entrance to Crescent Street stop 2 blocks to the east of the development site. This area is also served by the B13 and the B24 buses. Next. Land uses in the area include residential, commercial, and a mix of community facilities. The ground floor retails are located mainly on the ground floor of approximately mixed-use 3-story buildings along Fulton Street and Crescent Street, and a few commercial uses are also located on Euclid Avenue. The rest of the residential uses are mainly within 2- and 3-story buildings of the area. The development site is mapped, the project area is mapped an R5 zoning district with a C23 commercial overlay, which extends for multiple blocks to the north, south, and east. And as part of the East New York rezoning, the R6B C24 EC6 was mapped to the east of Fulton Street. To the south of the project area, there is the the lot that I mentioned before that is under construction and that corresponds to the N14 RAA district. The Special Enhanced Commercial District, EC6, is mapped along Fulton Street, west of the project area, and it runs through 25 blocks between Schiffel and Euclid Avenues. Next. The development site is an irregular shaped rectangular corner lot containing approximately 4,000 square feet of area, and it has frontage along Fulton Street and Euclid Avenue. The development site is currently improved with a 3-story building with approximately 9,000 square feet of floor area. It is currently vacant, and it was most recently used as a funeral home. Excuse me. Next. The whole project area comprises approximately 3,400 square feet. Each of the properties within the project area are in separate disparate ownership. Next. These lots are currently improved with 3-story buildings with approximately 3,500 square feet of floor area each. The ones fronting Fulton Street have retail on the ground floor and residence above, and the ones facing the side streets are mainly residential buildings. Next. The proposed project consists of a new 7-story mixed-use building that contains both residence and community facility. In total, it will be a 19,700 square feet of floor area, which contains approximately 17,000 square feet of residential uses dedicated to produce 33 ERTS dwelling units, and approximately 2,750 square feet of community facility uses to provide the daycare on the ground floor. The entrance to the ERTS units will be on Fulton Street, and the entrance to the daycare will be along Euclid Avenue. Next. The front wall of the proposed development will rise 75 feet, equal to 7 stories without setting back through the rear yard along Euclid Avenue. There will be a setback for a resident terrace at the 4th floor level, which also corresponds to the transition rule. And the proposed development will set back on Fulton Street by 5 feet, as it is required by the proposed enhanced commercial district 6. And in addition, for a street wall on this designated commercial street, the open area, which will be up to the street line, will be improved following the sidewalk guidance from the Department of Transportation. There are no off-street accessory parking spaces provided, and non-parking is required. Next. So in order to facilitate this development, the applicant is requesting a zoning map amendment to rezone a portion of block 4129 within 100 feet of Fulton Street from an R5 C23 to an R7A C24 EC6. And this portion of the rezoning area is bounded by Fulton Street, Pine Street, and Euclid Avenue up to 100 feet. The difference of this, the mapping of this street and the former commercial overlay C23 is proposed just for the commercial overlay to be removed. This will make the C24 depth in alignment with how it was mapped during the ECR rezoning. Next, this change triggers the need to map a new MIH area on Appendix F, as shown in the slide. Next. And in order to extend the special enhanced commercial district across the project area, the description of the special district needs to be modified on the zoning resolution. It currently is described to go along Fulton of the Borough of Brooklyn between Schiffel Avenue and Euclid Avenue, and the need is to replace Euclid Avenue with Pine Street to add a new block to the enhanced commercial district. This enhanced commercial district requires no residential uses on the ground floor, minimal levels of transparency in the ground floor, limits curb cuts to and live in the corridor, and requires the sidewalk widening as described before in certain locations. Next. I believe that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Alexandria. It is wonderful to see this, which is one of the projects coming to fruition out of our East New York rezoning. So that is very heartening. Are there any questions from the commission? Well, I don't see any. So I will say that this is certified, and thank you again, Alexandra.
Thank you. Have a good day.
The sixth item on our agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in Brooklyn Community District 15. Our presenter is Colin Lee.
Good afternoon, commissioners. We can go to the next slide. And this is an application by Omni Enterprises LLC to request a zoning map amendment to rezone portions of 2 blocks along Avenue P from an R5B to an R7A zoning district. In addition, the applicant seeks a zoning text amendment to designate the rezoning area as a mandatory inclusionary housing area. The proposed actions would facilitate a 11,240 square foot enlargement to the Levitt Medical Center. And the rezoning area is located in the Midwood neighborhood of Brooklyn and Community District 15. Next slide. And here is a view of the surrounding area with the rezoning area outlined in red. The surrounding area is predominantly comprised of 2 to 3 story, 1 to 2 family homes with a cluster of 6-story residential buildings along East 13th and East 14th Streets. Avenue P is a wide street at 100 feet. East 12th and 13th Streets are both narrow streets at 60 feet in width. The rezoning area is within the transit zone, which starts east of East 12th Street and is well served by public transportation. The Kings Highway BQ subway station is located 3 blocks southeast of the rezoning area, and the B7, B68, B82, and B100 bus lines are nearby. Next slide. The area has a mix of land uses from single to multifamily residential buildings, community facilities, and commercial uses. The area was a part of the 2006 Homecrest rezoning, which was a 70-block rezoning of predominantly residential areas. The goal of the rezoning was to preserve the neighborhood scale by mapping low-density contextual districts. As a result of the Homecrest rezoning, the medical center was rezoned from R6, a medium-density contextual district, to R5B, a low-density contextual row house district. Next slide. And here is a closer view of the rezoning area as it relates to the current zoning. The rezoning area is outlined in white and the development site is in red. The rezoning area is within the R5B zoning district that allows a maximum community facility FAR of 2 with a maximum base height of 30 feet and a maximum building height of 33 feet. Next slide. The rezoning area consists of 10 tax lots shown here, fronting on Avenue P, East 12th Street, and East 13th Street. The lots are primarily developed with community facility and residential uses with a total of 38,000 square feet combined. Next slide. The next few slides, I will display photos within the rezoning area. Block 6774, lots 6, 7, and 9 are each developed with 2 to 3 story, 1 to 2 family homes on lot sizes ranging between 3 and 4,000 square feet. Lot 9 on the right has a medical office on the ground floor. Next slide. And this is block 6774.
and 5 with lots 1 and 5. Each are developed with a two-story community facility buildings. The building on the right is a private religious high school, and the building to the left of the high school is a synagogue. Both are owned and operated by the Jewish Center of Kings Highway, and each lot is approximately 8,000 square feet. Next slide. And this is block 6775, lot 9. And this is within the development site and the existing use group 4, Levitt Medical Center, which is controlled by the applicants, Omni Enterprises LLC. The medical center is a 5-story, 19,536 square foot building on a 4,000 square foot lot fronting on Avenue P. It was constructed in 2000 on an as-of-right basis under the R6 zoning at that time, prior to the Homecrest rezoning. And the Levitt Medical Center provides a wide range of medical services related to oncology. Next slide. And here's a view along East 13th Street of lots 12 and 13. Both are within the development site, and the proposed enlargement would be developed on both of these 2 lots, joining the existing medical center on lot 9 shown on the right in the photo. Lot 12 is a 2,000 square foot lot that was used as surface parking for the medical center. And lot 13 is a 2,000 square foot lot that contains a 2-story residential building. Next slide. These 2 lots are 74 and 75. They are both 2-story row house buildings on 2,000 square foot lots fronting on East 12th Street. Lot 75 is also within the development site, and it was previously used as a house of worship, but is currently vacant. Next slide. The applicant is proposing a 4-story use group 4 enlargement to the medical center with approximately 11,240 square feet of additional floor area. The proposed development consists of 4 continuous tax lots shown in red, 9, 12, 13, and 75, that contain approximately 10,000 square feet. The development site has 40 feet of frontage on Avenue P, 140 feet of frontage on East 13th Street, and 20 feet of frontage on East 12th Street. The proposed 4-story enlargement would be constructed on lot 12, which is currently vacant and used for parking, and on lot 13, which contains a 2-story building that will be demolished. Although use group 4 ambulatory diagnostic or treatment care facilities do not require parking in the R7A zoning districts, the applicants are proposing 6 accessory parking spaces, which would be to the west of the enlargement on East 12th Street on lot 75. Next slide. And the maximum height in the R7A districts is 80 feet or 85 feet with a qualifying ground floor. The proposed enlargement adjacent to an R5, will be adjacent to an R5B district, which limits the maximum height of the building to 55 feet in the proposed R7A district. The limited maximum height does not allow the applicant's full usage of the floor area, and it results in inefficient floor plates that would be otherwise usable. Or the alternative would be to reduce the floor's heights down by making the ground floor shorter. With that said, the applicants are proposing a maximum height of 47 feet 10 inches on the proposed enlargement to line up with the existing building. The proposed enlargement combined with the existing 19,536 square feet of floor area would result in a development of 31,696 square feet of a use group 4 community facility with an FAR of 3.17. And I would also like to note that there will be a higher quality rendering, which will be provided at pre-hearing and the public meeting as well. Next slide. And in order to facilitate the proposed development, Omni Enterprises LLC is proposing a zoning map amendment to rezone a R5B district to an R7A and a zoning text amendment to designate a new mandatory inclusionary housing area. Next slide. And while community facility uses are permitted in the R5B zoning districts, the maximum FAR for community facilities in that district is 2. The maximum FAR for community facilities in our R7A district is 4. The proposed zoning map amendment would facilitate the enlargement of the medical center with a community facility FAR of 3.17. Without the proposed zoning map amendment action, the applicants would be unable to construct the proposed development under the existing bulk regulations for community facilities in a R5B district. According to the applicant, the expanded building would allow the medical center to serve an increased demand for healthcare and medical services in the community. And it will also introduce subspecialists and primary care physicians in areas such as rheumatology, radio oncology, and surgery. Next slide. And while the proposed development does not contain any new residential use, the applicant is requesting to designate the proposed rezoning area as a MIH area with options 1 and 2. And this concludes the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Colin. Commissioner Dweck.
Thank you. Colin, is this the first MIH mapping in that community district?
I believe it is, let me double check. It's the second.
Second.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and another question. So I was trying to understand the map, but the Coney Island Avenue has an R7A designation currently on it?
That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
I guess if you go back to, okay, yeah, that's correct.
Thank you, Commissioner Dweck. Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you. Colin, the briefing material, the briefing sheet indicates that this is a resubmission of an application that was withdrawn in 2017. Withdrawn during the public review by the applicant. Can you remind us what that application was for and how this one is different, how this one is likely to be more successful? What the issues were that led to withdrawal?
Yes, the application was withdrawn by the applicants in 2017. The applicant needed to reevaluate their proposal and remove the medical provider included in the rezoning at that time, who did not have an association with the medical center. So the application at that time had gone through your correct certification and was withdrawn during public review. The changes on this one is very minimal, is the medical provider and also the height.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would just clarify what Colin said. The applicant had indicated a provider that they were going to be affiliated with, but they, I think, got ahead of that sort of affiliation. And so that provider was not part of the team. And so they withdrew the application.
That's correct.
Commissioner Dweck, you have your hand again?
Yeah, I think I was just going to clarify for
that
Commissioner Levin. I think that was the NYU affiliation at the time, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
And then it didn't come through for some reason. So I guess we're seeing it now unaffiliated with NYU.
Mm-hmm. Correct. That's correct. Okay, thank you. So are there any other questions from the commission? Okay, so seeing none, I will tell you, thank you again, Colin, and this is certified.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The 7th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map, zoning text amendments in Brooklyn Community District 1. Our presenter is Catherine Richard.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application by Key Plaza LLC. It is located at 79 Key Street in the Greenpoint neighborhood of Brooklyn Community District 1. Next slide, please. The proposed development is a new 9-story mixed-use building reaching a height of 101 feet and a maximum base height of 67 feet. Approximately 10,600 square feet of retail space would be located on the ground floor. The remaining square footage would be for residential use, and 86 dwelling units would be provided, including between 22 and 26 affordable units under the mandatory inclusionary housing program. 32 vehicle parking spaces and 43 bicycle parking spaces would be provided in the cellar. Next slide, please. To facilitate the proposed development, the applicant is seeking a zoning map amendment and zoning text amendment. The zoning map amendment would rezone the project area from an M12 R6A zoning district in the MX8 Special Mixed Use District to an M14 R7D zoning district, still in the MX8. The zoning text amendment would establish a new MIH area with options 1 and 2 and would add R7D to the list of designated residence districts in MX8. Next slide, please. Brooklyn Community Board 1 held a public hearing for this application on September 9th, 2021, and on September 14th voted to approve with conditions with 29 votes in favor, none opposed, and no abstentions. The board included 4 conditions in their recommendation, 2 of which were around building design. And I'll just note that this rendering is the design that was presented to the board. It's not one addressing their recommendations. So one of these was that the architect and applicant worked together to design a more contextual building that had fewer horizontal lines and was less hotel-like. The other was that the building integrate more green and sustainable elements, not just planting and greenery at the building. And some suggested features included rain gardens and renewable energy sourcing. The board also recommended that the owner make a long-term contribution towards the maintenance of Bushwick Inlet Park and that the owner work with nearby block associations to ensure retail diversity in the ground floor commercial space. In response to these conditions, the applicant has already reached out to the Parks Department about the request for Bushwick Inlet Park, and they have stated that they will work with the local community on the local retail when it's closer time to seek a tenant, as well as work with the community board on the building design, and that they do intend to provide sustainability features in the building and can address this more at the public hearing. Next slide, please. The Brooklyn Borough President held a public hearing for this project on October 6, 2021. We have not yet received the recommendation, but we'll definitely share with the commission as soon as we have it. And at certification, some questions came up about floor plans and questions about the unit breakdown. The applicant can speak to the unit questions on Wednesday, and floor plans are included in the briefing materials. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Katie. Any questions from the commission? Oh, Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you, Chair. Just an observation. I trust that the developers will take the recommendation of the community board as it relates to the proposed design to heart. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, this is on for Wednesday's hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The 8th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning text amendment and a special permit in Brooklyn Community District 1. Our presenter is Lilia Carrier.
All right, good afternoon, commissioners. We can go to the next slide, please. This is an application by One Wife LLC requesting a text amendment to expand an existing industrial business incentive area and a CPC special permit to facilitate the development of an 8-story, approximately 80,700 square foot mixed office, industrial, and retail development located at One Wife Avenue in Williamsburg, Brooklyn Community District 1. The proposed project area is outlined in red and located within the Greenpoint Williamsburg Industrial Business Zone, shown in outlined in black. Highlighted in pink are recent IVA special permit projects. Next slide, please. The surrounding area consists primarily of low-scale buildings with a mix of light industrial, office, hotel, retail, and restaurant uses. The 35-acre McCarran Park is located to the east of the project area, and the when complete Bushwick Inlet Park will stretch from North 9th Street to Key Street with a total of 28 acres. Development in the area includes several IBA projects. There's 25 Kent, the first ground-up office industrial building developed in this area, which is located 3 blocks southwest of the project area. 103 13th Street, North 13th Street, a 7-story mixed industrial and commercial building, which is currently under construction and 1 block south of the project area. 12 Franklin, a proposed 7-story mixed industrial commercial building northwest of the project area. And we have 2941 Wythe Avenue, a pre-certification IBA project located 1 block south of the project area. Immediately northwest and across Wythe Avenue is the recently approved Acme Smoke Fish rezoning that facilitated the development, the proposed 9-story mixed commercial and industrial building at 30 Gem Street. Other development has generally been limited to hotels such as the 22-story William Vale Hotel located 2 blocks south of the project area. Next slide, please. The proposed development is an 8-story, 110-foot tall, 80,700 square foot building containing 67,000 square feet of office and retail space and 13,500 square feet of light industrial space. The entrance to the lobby is located at Banker Street, but accessible from Wythe Avenue as well. There's 1 curb cut for entry to the loading berth, which is also along Banker Street. The required industrial use and accessory retail use will be located on the ground floor. The cellar and 2nd through 8th floors will contain use group 6 office space. Terraces will be located on the 4th, 6th, and 8th floors, and there will also be publicly accessible open space with planted seating area at the intersection of Banker Street and North 15th Street. Next slide, please. To facilitate the development, the applicant is proposing a zoning text amendment to designate the project area as an industrial business incentive area and a CPC special permit. A project within an IBIA can seek a special permit to modify the underlying FAR, building envelope, and to modify the parking and loading requirements. Next slide, please. On September 12th, Community Board 1 voted to approve the application with conditions. Conditions included requests for more greenery and resiliency measures, as well as to reach out to the surrounding neighborhood and community. Next slide, please. The Brooklyn Borough President held a hearing on this application on September 27th. We are still awaiting the Borough President's recommendations, and we'll share with the Commission as soon as we have received them. Next slide, please. So in summary, the applicant is requesting a zoning text amendment to expand the existing industrial and business incentive area and seeking a special permit to facilitate the development of an 8-story, approximately 80,700 square foot mixed office, industrial, and retail development located at 1 Wythe Avenue. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Lilia. Are there any questions from the Commission for Lilia? Commissioner Dweck.
Hi, thank you. Can you clarify the incentive uses?
Yeah, so if we have an appendix where we can go through the ground floor, all different floor plans. So the incentive use is basically going to be retail right now. The ground floor will be the required industrial uses, so small scale manufacturing uses. So that's going to be ground floor. And then next slide. And then, upper floors are permitted uses under the existing M12. So anything from retail to associated with manufacturing uses, office space, and then the incentive use is located here on the 3rd floor, which is office space. And I can have the applicant team kind of walk through what they're thinking for each use.
Yes, and if they could also
go to the.
And if they could
Sorry.
also clarify how much of the industrial space will be accessory, how much of the retail space will be accessory to the industrial or vice versa. So I see Commissioner
Okay.
Levin nodding her head. It looks like she had the same question. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Levin?
Yes, I did have the same question. Thank you, Commissioner Dweck. But before I was going to get to that question, I was going to hope that the applicant can tell us at the hearing a little bit more about their intentions for the industrial use. What market research have they done? What kind of tenant do you think are they anticipating being able to attract to the space? Maybe it's a question for city planning. What success have we had in locating, successfully siting industrial uses in these IBIA buildings? I guess it's just 25 Kent that is now up and running. Is that one fully tenanted? Are there tenants for the other ones that have been approved? It just seems to me that we're getting a lot of these. I mean, I look back on the tremendous attention that we gave to 25 Kent when we created this IBIA program. There were a host of questions and real concerns about intrusions into the IBZs and wanting to be sure that we were really building quality industrial space. And then the last three have just sort of gone, they got approved, before any of our lessons had been learned. So I hope we can dig into the success of this IBA model a little bit more with this applicant to understand that this building will be a successful project. Oh, and one last thing. I hope they can tell us a little bit more about transportation. They're not planning any parking spaces. They're planning only one loading berth for a mix of uses. How is that going to work? And they only have 15 bicycle spots in a neighborhood that is prime for getting around by bicycle. So I hope they can do a little bit better on that.
Just in terms of 25 Kent, yeah, so I think for the most part, most of the IBA projects are kind of still under construction or in, the planning phases, but 25 Kent, we do know the anchor tenant there. So it's Kith, which is the industrial use. So that's like a clothing manufacturer. And then they kind of have a range of other tenants from, a beer hall, the Brooklyn Flea goes there in the winter. And they have, what else? Amazon Music is going to be one of the office space. So they supposedly have a lot of tenants coming on, but I think they've probably been a little bit delayed due to the pandemic.
Yeah, I was just going to make that point that the pandemic has in certain ways arrested the progress on this, but I think we certainly can give you something very specific about what is happening at 25 Kent, and then as appropriate, have reporting back to the commission as to the other, projects that we've approved as they come online. I think it's a completely legitimate inquiry as to how these are doing. I just think it's a little challenging in the COVID era to really make a assessment that would apply generally.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I fully appreciate
Any other
that.
questions from? Okay. All right. Well, Lilia, thank you very much. And this will be on for Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The 9th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in Queens Community District 4. Our presenter is Kathy Coe.
Hello, good afternoon, Commission. We can move on to the next slide. This is 4520 83rd Street rezoning. It's a private application in the Elmhurst neighborhood of Queens Community District 4 and was certified on July 26, 2021. This application is for a zoning map amendment from an M11 district to an R7A district and a zoning text amendment to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area to facilitate a 9-story residential building and would permit a new charter school as of right. Next slide, please. The proposed project area is in Elmhurst, which is in central Queens. It's located 1 block west of Broadway, which is a prominent commercial corridor in this part of Elmhurst. And the southern boundary of the project area abuts the Long Island Railroad Port Washington branch. The project area is located within the transit zone, and the Elmhurst Avenue MR subway station is located 1 block northeast, and the area is also served by local buses that run along Broadway. Next slide, please. And there was a BSA action that was pursued prior to this application to allow a school in the current M11 district. The proposed map amendment would permit a planned charter school as of right in an R7A. And the applicant was granted by the BSA in June 2020 to allow a 4-story, 63,264 square foot charter school at an FAR of 1.42. And the applicant proposes to convert and enlarge the eastern portion of the existing warehouse building into the school. The Renaissance Charter School would occupy the building in the 2022 to 2023 school year and serve kindergarten through 6th grades. On the western portion of the site, the applicant proposes a new 9-story residential building at a height of 90 feet. It would total approximately 141,133 square feet at an FAR of 3.18. And the applicant proposes to build approximately 163 new dwelling units, of which 41 to 49 would be made permanently affordable under MIH options 1 or 2. The building would provide 72 parking spaces in the cellar to be accessed by a 22-foot curb cut on 47th Avenue. Next slide, please. And here we have the ground floor site plan with the proposed residential building on the western side of the development site and the planned charter school on the eastern side. The residential portion rises to 6 stories fronting 47th Avenue and then rises to 9 stories. And there's a building overhang on the eastern side as it transitions to the school portion, where you can see the roof on the 2nd story, and the building then rises to a height of 4 stories. Next slide, please. So to facilitate this development, the applicant proposes to rezone the property from an N11 district to an R7A district, which unlocks residential use and, according to the applicant, better suits the area's medium density zoning districts that are north of the Long Island Railroad right-of-way, and the project area's access to public transit. It also reflects the land use patterns of the recently developed 8-story mixed-use buildings that are located directly north of the site. Next slide, please. The application also includes a zoning text amendment to establish an MIH area, and the applicant proposes to map MIH options 1 and 2. And the AMI for Community District 4 is roughly 49,000, and the AMI for the Borough of Queens is approximately 65,000, and for New York City is approximately 61,000. Next slide, please. And on September 14th, 2021, Queens Community Board 4 held a public hearing. 39 members opposed the recommendation to approve the application, with 0 in favor. The board discussed concerns about the area's need for deeper affordable housing and the impact of new development on the neighborhood's infrastructure. And the Queensborough president held a public hearing on September 23rd, and the applicant responded to questions about addressing the community board's concerns by reviewing the MIH rent breakdowns and stating that they are looking forward to working with the city council on addressing the need for deeper affordability. And we are currently awaiting recommendations from the Queensborough president. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Are there any questions from the commission on this? So this will be on for hearing on Wednesday. Thank you very much.
The 10th item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in Queens Community District 1, and Kathy will be presenting this as well.
Thanks. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. This is 31st Street and Hoyt Avenue rezoning. It's a private application in the Astoria neighborhood of Queens Community District 1, and this application was certified on June 21st. The proposed rezoning area spans 3 blocks along the eastern side of 31st Street and includes 27 lots all along the corridor. And within this rezoning area, there are 3 development sites that would facilitate 3 new mixed-use buildings containing residential, commercial, and community facility uses. The applicant proposes a zoning map amendment from existing C43 and R5B districts to a C45X and C44 districts, and a zoning map amendment to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area to map option 1. Next slide, please. And the proposed project area is located in Astoria. The area is well served by public transit, with the elevated NW subway line running north-south in this part of Astoria along 31st Street. The Astoria Boulevard station is located at the intersection of 31st Street and Astoria Boulevard, with one of its 4 station access points directly adjacent to one of the project area sites. A half-mile north of the project area is the Ditmars Boulevard station, which is the terminus for the NW line. Bus lines in the area include the Q19 and M60 SBS buses which run along Astoria Boulevard, and the Q69 line, which runs along Ditmars Boulevard. Astoria Boulevard and Hoyt Avenue are the service road for the Grand Central Parkway, which runs east-west in this part of the borough and approaches the RFK Bridge going further west. Next slide, please. This slide shows an aerial of the proposed development sites that are shaded in red, which are within the proposed rezoning area, which is outlined in the dotted black line. Here we see Hoyt Playground, located directly west of development sites 1 and 2, and PS 85 is west of development site 3. We can also see the 15-story Hannock Senior Housing Building, which is southwest of the project area, and Astoria Park is approximately a half-mile further west of the project area. Next slide, please. So the applicant proposes 3 new development sites, or 3 new developments, one of which is an 11-story building with a total of approximately 60,242 square feet at 5.98 FAR, located within the proposed C45X district. The proposed development would consist of approximately 46,394 square feet of residential floor area on floors 3 through 11 with 51 dwelling units, including 13 affordable units that are pursuant to MIH option 1. It would also contain approximately 10,784 square feet of commercial space on the first floor and approximately 3,000 square feet of community facility floor area on the second floor, which is intended for a daycare. Next slide, please. The applicant also proposes a 12-story mixed-use building partially within the proposed C45X district. The northeastern portion of the development site would remain in the R5B district. And I'll note that the height of this building has been modified from its initial height of 14 stories when it entered public review. The applicant has reduced it to 12 stories as a result of feedback throughout ULURP. And this proposed development would contain a total of approximately 180,122 square feet of floor area at 6.07 FAR. And there would be approximately 161,706 square feet of residential floor area on floors 2 through 12 and approximately 14,454 square feet of commercial use and 3,962 square feet of community facility use on the ground floor. The applicant proposes a senior center to be located in the community facility space. There would be approximately 161 new dwelling units, including 40 permanently affordable units under MIH option 1, and a new curb cut on 31st Street would provide access to 61 parking spaces. Next slide, please. And finally, the applicant on development site 3 proposes an 11-story building totaling approximately 80,076 square feet at 5.93 FAR. It would contain approximately 61,698 square feet of residential floor area on floors 4 through 11, approximately 7,000 square feet of commercial use on the ground floor, and approximately 8,000 square feet of commercial use on the second and third floors. It would contain approximately 75 new dwelling units, of which 19 would be made affordable under MIH option 1, and there would be 19 parking spaces available in the cellar. And I'll also note that this is a modification from the initially proposed layout for this building, which included parking on the second floor as opposed to the cellar. Next slide, please. And to facilitate these developments, the applicant proposes 2 actions, one of which is a zoning map amendment. The proposed C45X district is bounded by a line 200 feet north of and parallel to 24th Road to the north, Astoria Boulevard to the south, 31st Street to the west, and a line 90 feet from and parallel to 31st Street to the east. The southern portion of this rezoning boundary is adjacent to multiple wide streets and the Astoria Boulevard subway station. The northern portion of the proposed rezoning boundary is the proposed C44 district, which is bounded by a line 200 feet north of and parallel to 24th Avenue to the north, a line 200 feet north of and parallel to 24th Road to the south, 31st Street to the west, and a line 90 feet from and parallel to 31st Street to the east. Next slide, please. And the applicant proposes a zoning text amendment to map option 1 to be coterminous with the project area. In 2018, this area was mapped with MIH area number 1 which is located southeast of the project area. And the shaded area with the hashtag symbol is a proposed MIH area. The AMI for Community District 1 is 64,000, and the AMI for this part of Astoria is approximately 81,000. This disparity in AMIs highlights the need to stretch affordable housing resources for households with lower incomes across the district. Next slide, please. And here we have an aerial rendering of all 3 development sites looking northeast. Next slide, please. On September 21st, 2021, Queens Community Board 1 held a public hearing. 25 members voted to disapprove the application, 4 voted in favor and 4 abstained. The board discussed concerns around the height and density of the proposed developments in context of the immediate surrounding area and the need for deeper levels of affordable housing. 13 members of the public testified at the hearing. There were 10 in opposition and 3 in favor. The Queensborough president held a public hearing on September 23rd. 5 speakers testified in opposition of the applications, largely representing local residents in the immediate vicinity of the project area, and spoke to concerns that were similar to what the board had discussed. 10 speakers spoke in favor, largely representing public housing tenants throughout the district, including Ravenswood, Woodside, Astoria, and Queensbridge houses, who spoke about the need for opportunities to apply for affordable housing lotteries, as well as representatives from area churches. And we are currently awaiting those recommendations as well. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks again, Kathy. Are there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Levin.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. I noticed, so this stretch of 31st Street was indeed included in the 2010 Astoria rezoning and mapped with the voluntary inclusionary housing program or to allow voluntary inclusionary housing. There's been several new buildings in the immediate vicinity of the development sites here along 31st. Have any of those used the voluntary program? Has the 2010 rezoning produced any affordable housing in the area?
That's a good question. There are definitely, it did result in several mixed-use developments along this corridor. It was definitely successful in its goals in guiding development along wide streets and close to transit resources and commercial corridors such as 31st Street. I can get back to you on whether or not those had participated in the voluntary housing program.
Yeah, so just to put a finer point on my question is to observe that the proposed density here, essentially doubles the existing density. I think we heard from the community board's concern about the heights of the building, and I'm glad the applicant has been somewhat responsive to that, but it wasn't that long ago that we rezoned it with an intention of balancing the production of housing with attention to the area context. And here we are going in quite a different direction. And I know that we are, 11 years away from 2010, and the world has changed in many ways, but this is a significant new direction in our thinking about how to map for housing. And I can understand how the community may not be thrilled with it. Oh yeah, and one follow-up question. The community board's recommendation indicates that they don't have a council member. Is that true? Is that council seat still vacant? And what access has that community had to consultation, or will they have to consultation with the city council as this ULURP moves forward?
The council seat has been vacant, and the community board has been in contact with the Assembly Members District for some support around this with the vacant council seat. And as far as outreach from the applicant goes, they have been meeting with city council, land use, and they have meetings scheduled with the subcommittee chair and the speaker's office as well. I'll also, just to backtrack to the previous point about inclusionary housing, I'll note that the 2010 Astoria rezoning mapped inclusionary housing in R7A and C44A districts, which is not along this corridor. So as a result of, while there have been mixed use developments, they've not the program hasn't been applied in this area because it's not
Okay.
mapped here.
Yeah, thank you.
So
for
as part of
I-
this
yeah,
rezoning,
I
we would
misread
mandate
the briefing sheet. The sentence I was looking at referred to the wider rezoning, not this corridor. So thanks for straightening me out on that.
Any other questions from the commission? Okay. I don't see any, so thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you.
Brian.
Okay. The 11th item on our agenda is a city council modification scope determination for 1776 48th Street rezoning. The city council proposes to reduce the depth of the R6B from 100 feet from 48th Street to 65 feet. So it will exclude some of the homes on the side street is my understanding of the modification. The department believes that this modification is within scope.
Thank you, Ryan. So we're asked to send a scope determination letter to the city council. All in favor, please say yay.
Okay.
Commissioners?
Yay.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll send the letter. Thank you.
All right. The 12th item on our agenda is a city council modification scope determination for 270 Nostrand Avenue rezoning. Josh Vogel is here to discuss.
Thank you, Ryan. On October 21st, 2021, the Land Use Committee of the City Council, by a vote of 14 in favor, 1 against, and none abstaining, voted to recommend approval of the applications with modifications. For the zoning map amendment, the City Council recommended to modify the R7X, R7D district back to R8A, the zoning district that was originally certified. And for the zoning text amendment, the council voted to remove the workforce option for MIH. Both modifications are in scope. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. This is, I will note, is an example of the council being more robust than we are. We had recommended doing something less than was done here, but we do believe that this is in scope. And so we're asking you all to give us the authority to send the scope determination letter to the city council. So all of those in favor of that, say aye, please.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll send it.
Right. The 13th item on our agenda is a city council modification scope determination for River North. George Todorovich is here to discuss.
Hi, good afternoon, commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. This application is returning to the commission after it was approved on September 1st. Excuse me. After it was approved on September 1st as a result of city council modifications. The modifications include a modified rezoning boundary related to the map amendment action and reduced building heights related to the special permit action. Next slide. Modifications to the zoning map amendment action would modify the proposed rezoning boundary to be 260 feet east of Nicholas Street. The modified boundary would exclude lot 60, which includes an existing 11-story building, as well as lots 71 and a portion of lot 73, which was analyzed as projected development site 2 in the EIS. These sites would remain zoned as R6C22 within the Special Hillsides Preservation District. The applicant has submitted a technical memorandum detailing the modified boundaries and removing the E designation from projected development site 2. The technical memorandum determines that the conclusions of the EIS would not change and that the modified rezoning boundaries are within the scope of the project. Next slide, please. Modifications to the special permit action would reduce the height of both building 1 and building 2. Building 1 would be reduced from 273 feet to 166 feet, totaling 16 stories, and building 2 would be reduced from 244 feet to 104 feet, totaling 11 stories. Due to these proposed modifications, it is important to note that a special permit waiver is no longer being sought for building height, as you can see indicated in the dashed red line. The maximum building height for each of the modified buildings is not being exceeded, except for the bulkhead of building 1 on the far left, which is a permitted obstruction. Similar to the modified zoning boundary action, the technical memorandum determines that the conclusions of the EIS would not change with respect to the special permit action, and that the modified building heights are within scope. Next slide, please. So in summary, the modified development proposal would include approximately 500,000 square feet of floor area within 3 mixed-use buildings, with a total of 625 dwelling units, of which 188 would be affordable. The modified development also includes a slight reduction in commercial office space and parking, yet maintains the 2 public plazas along the street frontage, which were previously proposed. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. I just want to note here that although the modified project doesn't maximize the amount of housing that would be developed as we had approved, nor in fact even rise to the heights that the St. George Special District allows. Nonetheless, I am really ecstatic that this passed, because there is no site in Staten Island that I can think of that is more appropriate for bringing new density and having Staten Island come into the fold and play a role in addressing some of our housing challenges. So I think this is a great outcome here, and I'm happy with the work that our team and the council member did here. Commissioner Capelli.
Yes, I was not able to attend the vote on this, and were I would have expressed my concern with the size and the scope. And I realize how difficult it is to balance the need for affordable housing and density. And believe me, I'm not somebody who's against density, but everything in its proper place. The action before us today is merely whether or not this is consistent with what the City Planning Commission voted on. And it appears to me that it is in the direction for which I would have wanted to see this thing go, which would have been to bring the height down on some of these buildings. So I would be voting yes. The other concern I would have raised at the hearing, at the vote, would have been with respect to the EIS statement. I did have some concerns prior to all of that about whether or not the parking garage was adequately covered in that, but that would be an issue, I suppose, if they can, the council could deal with now, or I'm not sure that they can even do that, but I did want to put that on the record.
Thank you. Commissioner Burney.
Oh, thank you. This comment pertains not only to this letter, but to other letters, I think, that we've done in the past and will in the future. And I understand, this is something of a technical matter, whether it's in scope or not in scope. But what we do then is we send this very anodyne letter to the City Council saying, okay, as if we don't really care. And it seems to me that we should be building into these letters in some cases, and this might be one of them, where they've made a significant land use decision overriding the council that I don't think, the commission, that I don't think we necessarily agree with. And I think our letter should include some statement to that effect.
Thank you. I will just say on that has been a comment over the course of years. And we do certainly when we act on a matter in our report, we actually underscore what is most important to us. And the true confines of this letter really has to do just with, as you said, the technical matter of whether or not what they have done is permissible for them to do, given their authority over these matters. You know, where we think it's a fundamental error or not legal, we have in the past, you know, written letters, but you know, we try to have those conversations offline as much as possible, because we do need to maintain a good working relationship with the council. And in fact, the way the charter is constructed, they do have the right to not necessarily heed our land use, you know, advice here. But I hear you, and you know, where the commission thinks it's important, I think we have to think about how we actually should be sharing that information so that you're aware that we have, because believe me, there's a lot of colloquy and back and forth on these things. So I appreciate what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cerullo.
So,
yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just, really, this is a reflection more than anything else. And this, I say, recognizing the charter-driven authority of the council to do what the council does. And I obviously, having raised the issues of the height of these buildings as one of the concerns that the community board, the borough president, and actually almost all the elected officials on Staten Island had about this application. The reality is that, that what is happening in this particular situation really draws attention to the structure of how the land use process works. The commission, and I can say this, the commission raised the issues. I certainly raised the issues as a member of the commission about the height of these buildings. The response was very clear that the height of the buildings was a necessary component to building what the applicants wanted to build. It was the best way to maximize the housing and the units, and we would not be able to get the superior design without what we were given. And somehow, in the process of getting past us, then all of a sudden it was able to start chopping stories off the height of these buildings, and at least two of them. And so while I welcome that modification, the reality is it does draw attention to how applicants view the importance of the commission's work, the impact the commission has on applications as they move through land use, because of how the council and sort of local discretion is playing out. The reality is that in this case, we were just a part of the process they had to get by to then go and cut their deal with the council members so they can get it through the council. And this is not the first and only time this has happened, and it won't be the last. But I definitely, it's a reminder. And I think at some point, what it means for the commission, whoever is here next year, to really begin to think about being stronger with applicants when we have issues that we are really concerned about, so that we are actually really making some planning determinations for our communities, and not just, and we're viewed that way by applicants, and not just as a piece of a, you know, sort of a flow chart to get by in a certain number of days, so that they can get to the council where the real work is viewed as being done. And I just say that for the record, because as you know, pleased as I am that these buildings are not as big, I'm still disappointed that the R7 has made its way into the North Shore. But it's amazing to me that the height of these buildings was not as important as it was when they were presenting to us, you know, only a few weeks earlier than the council's consideration. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity just to share those thoughts.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other comments? If not, I will note that we are asked to send a scope determination letter to the city council. So I will ask all those in favor to say aye.
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 Any opposed? Then we will send the letter to the city council. Thank you, George, very much.
Thank you, commissioners. Have a good day.
Okay, for future votes, for Wednesday, November 3rd, staff prepared reports for Sterrett Lehigh and Terminal Warehouse, the Castle Hill bid, 10316 Van Wyck Expressway. I'll note that Commissioner Rampashad is recused on that. The disposition of Seaport properties, noting that that is somewhat expedited. Also scheduled for a decision on Wednesday, 5051 Iceland Avenue, 2720 Highland Boulevard, Bublitz property, 104 Canton Avenue, 66 and 68 Delmere Road. I'll note that 4295 Arthur Kill Road appeared on our agenda and is slated to be laid over. Okay, not seeing any raised hands. We'll move on to post-hearing follow-ups. On River Ring, there was a memo in your package that just had some details on some of the modifications that the team had previously discussed. If there are any further questions about those, the Brooklyn office is here, I believe, to answer any questions. All right. Beach 79 self-storage. Further questions on that? And 16005 Archer Avenue. Okay. On 415 Madison Avenue, I'll note that Commissioner Cirillo is recused on this item, and he's turn off his camera grade. Aska and Scott are here to discuss some of just a few things. Hello.
Hey, good afternoon again. So following the public hearing for 415 Madison Avenue on Wednesday, October 20th, we're here for a post-hearing follow-up. The application seeks 2 Greater East Midtown special permits to enable a new commercial development with a public concourse. At the public hearing, a question arose from the commission about the scale and impact of the future artwork to be installed in the public concourse. Can you guys notice the next slide? Sorry. At the public hearing, a question arose from the commission about the scale and impact of the future artwork to be installed in the public concourse and how it may differ from the illustrative rendering shown on the right. Specifically, there was a concern that a future artwork may overwhelm the space to the detriment of public use. The department felt it was important to address this concern as the project moves toward a vote. The proposed plans call for a sculpture in each planter structure shown on the left with a red dashed outline, while also allowing for generous seating and pedestrian thoroughfare around the planters. Next slide, please. Of note is a required finding of the special permit for the provision of a public concourse that speaks to the qualitative restrictions for how these public spaces must be designed. Specifically, the part of the finding highlighted here requires that the concourse be designed in a manner that combines the separate elements within the space in a cohesive and harmonious site plan. The department considers the findings supported by discussion of the general objectives for a future artwork within the CPC report will impose a sufficient guidance. Providing this guidance in a qualitative manner will balance the need to ensure the space is high quality in both function and design as intended, without unnecessarily curtailing the artist's ability to continue to contribute a unique and defining feature for which will be a prominent public space. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Aska. Are there any questions from the commission about this? Commissioner Levin.
Yes, well, so thank you for digging into my question. Can you elaborate, though, a little bit on what that means. They're applying for a special permit here, so there will be drawings and designs that describe what it is they're supposed to put in the concourse. Are there any dimensional limitations? When does judgment get applied to whatever artwork they select? Just reassure me we're not getting mini vessels.
So in that sense, this specific special permit, that's the finding of the special permit I was referring to. And, within the CPC report, we can describe the qualitative nature to ensure that this does not overwhelm the space in scale and impact. And that would be, there within the plans, it's not so much the dimensions of the artwork, but rather the location of it. So that's what we showed you with the highlighted in the plans for the planters. But the CPC report, in connection with the finding that calls for a harmonious site plan, will be where we can describe this qualitatively.
Okay, but then they're going to go off and build their building and contract with or maybe commission a piece of art. They'll make their own decisions about what the appropriate artwork is, and it's not for us to get into artistic design questions. But who gets to look back at what they select and say, oh yeah, that's consistent with the findings? Is there a look at the artwork before it gets installed? I don't think so.
I don't believe there's an approval beyond this. The CPC and the special permit findings is provide the guidelines, and then they should be designing within those guidelines that were approved. Okay. And if it goes beyond that, then that could be something we could call to question.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know that would have saved us in the Eastern Rail Yards, which is, of course, the example that's in my mind here. I mean, certainly the qualitative language that you've got there, I see that Commissioner Burney has his hand up, so he's going to apply some architectural reason to this and come up with a brilliant solution. But, the quality of openness that is shown in the renderings, I think, is just really important for us to maintain in this public space with an appropriate piece of artwork that enlivens the space. Not for me to define what that is, but we can't end up with some big slabby thing in there.
Commissioner Levin, before Commissioner Burney, I will say that, when we talked about this, we really did not think that it would be appropriate to dimensionally really define it, because there are many ways that you still could do this that that wouldn't necessarily capture. This is, in some respects, I think we think slightly less challenging than the vessel in Hudson Yards, given that it's within a contained space. But we're acknowledging that there's a little difficulty here with us being able to specify exactly what would be okay. And so now I'm going to turn to Commissioner Burney, who may tell us how we actually could do that. We thought we did a good job. Commissioner Burney.
I'm sure you did a terrific job. And on the other hand, I wholeheartedly share Commissioner Levin's concerns. And I was just wondering, why isn't it going to the Public Design Commission? It's a public art in a public space. Why isn't that possible? Why isn't that part of the process?
It's privately owned,
right?
It's privately owned. Yeah.
But it's a privately owned public space, right?
That's right.
So
right.
Normally
POPs don't go to the Public Design Commission.
Well, I'm just saying they should.
Yeah. Can we ask, make it a condition of the permit that they consult with them?
I don't know that would be probably a text amendment.
Yeah, no, the applicant's having a heart attack.
Charter amendment to require it.
I don't think we can do that.
So.
Right.
Well, it's a small price to pay for Commissioner Levin sleeping well at night.
And we passed legislation right now to that effect.
Right. I mean, I don't think we can do that. I don't think we can do that.
We wanted to strike a balance here between prescribing what could go here. And if you look carefully at the drawings, there actually is a little dotted box on both on that sort of defines an envelope for these things. And we looked at that and we actually asked ourselves, well, do these little trees that they're showing us, do those actually fit in the box? And we're not 100% certain that they do. So, we did want to look at this as in terms of placement, and then a robust sort of description in our report about what the commission's expectations are for this artwork and what it has to look like and be. And
I will also note, commissioners, that, if the owner put something in that we felt strongly did not meet the criteria that was in a special permit, we have the ability to threaten to, yank the special permit for failure to comply. That is a very draconian thing, but no applicant wants that to be a posture that they are in. And so, this is a good applicant that we think we're working in good faith with. And so, I think we've tried to define as well as we can what would be appropriate. And the thing about the box that Ryan indicates is that box, even probably half filled if it were solid, would be horrible in this small space. So it's really, you have to allow some latitude to see what it is and weigh whether or not it reads okay in the space.
Well, thank you for thinking about it.
Oh, and just one last thing. Maybe we should think about adding a few floors on the basis that the city council will be taking them off again.
Now they added many floors to 270 Nostrand, so.
Yes. Commissioner Maureen. We can't hear you.
Here we go.
I think you're muted now.
I am unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm having some computer. Sorry, my phone dropped off. So, we had the question of appropriateness of the artwork that goes up, and let's, for a second, do we have any jurisdiction over sort of the movable furniture that goes there? Because then, we've seen this argument where we have certain sort of a prescription of what our public spaces should look like, and then folks don't conform what we think they should. And in certain cases, I know that some public open spaces on Water Street, I'm not too sure they were private or public, but the way they were intended were never the way they were used. There was no furniture there. There was really no public plaza. So I understand the concerns that Commissioner Levin is expressing. And I'm wondering, how does this also play into movable seating? I mean, do we have any jurisdiction with that? Or are we going to just find a space that's empty and barren at some point?
So within the context of this, there are required seating, which includes the movable furniture as well. And that is indicated on the plan. So it will be part of the approved plans, and they will have to comply with a number of approved movable seating that they indicated.
At least there's some control over the seating arrangement and the space. Right. Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions here? Okay, Ryan, I don't see any.
Okay, so that is it for our agenda, the review session today on Monday, November 1st, 2021. The time is 4:35 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.